Last week, RVTV gave us a countdown. I haven't seen anything yet.
Mayor, we're live.
Oh, okay. In that case, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the September 20th, 2021 Grants Pass City Council Workshop. Our first topic today is to discuss the public easement river access. And I'm going to ask everybody to please mute your microphones unless you're the person presenting. If you're on the phone and you need to raise your hand, it's *5, and to unmute yourself on the phone is *6.
Good morning, Mayor. My name is Craig Rodenmeyer. I'm with the Bikeways and Walkways Committee.
Hello?
Hi, I'm the one who's giving a report and recommendation.
Okay, terrific. Go ahead.
Well, hold on a second. Is there no staff presentation?
No, I've got a staff presentation, Mayor. This is Aaron.
Oh, okay. Okay, in that case, Craig,
I'm going to share my
after the staff presentation, please.
I'm going to share my screen with you here. All right, so today's topic is to talk about public river access. Subject and summary, Council's review and discussion of the Bikeways and Walkways Committee's river access recommendations. Relationship to Council goals, enhance community safety, and maintain, operate, expand our infrastructure to meet community needs, both for enhancing safety and security on one end, and also ensuring pedestrian and bicycle path needs are met. So just as a general background, this is not the first time that we've had this discussion. Back in 2013, this was discussed in some detail. The issue of public access and the use of property was brought to the attention of the city by a petition of property owners asking for assistance in dealing with less than desirable activities that were occurring in and around the river when they were coming down to the access points. So when it comes to access to the river, you can have public access to certain parts of the river, and it really depends on if the river is navigable and non-navigable and what type of use can be used on its banks. So navigable waterway means that the banks up to the ordinary high water line are owned by the public and held in trust for public purposes by the Division of State Lands. Non-navigable means the landowner generally owns the land beneath the water and to the extent to the center of the waterway. So I have some examples just to show you here. So the top screen, the color one, is just low, average, high water levels. And when it comes to the use of the banks, if it was navigable, then the banks are being able to be utilized up to the ordinary high water mark. So in the summertime, if the water is low or average, there's certain portions of the bank that could be utilized by the public. The diagram in the lower right corner also provides some additional details for you on that, and that is that you have the river access here that's navigable, which means that the property owner owns the property at the high water mark. If it's non-navigable, which usually occurs in rivers and streams that have been deemed non-navigable, especially smaller streams, the property owners on either side of the property own halfway to in the middle of the waterway and the land underneath it, not the water. So there's been some conflict with, there we go. So access along the river has flip-flopped or teeter-tottered a little bit when it comes to is it navigable or non-navigable. So back in 2008, the Division of State Lands conducted a road river navigability study, which declared the river navigable from the mouth at the coast all the way upstream of Grants Pass, quite a few miles. This was challenged back in 2010 by the Jackson County Circuit Court, and it was overruled as it was determined that the study did not provide sufficient evidence to support truly a navigable river above the 100-mile mark. Now, the 100-mile mark, if you're looking at river miles, is just west of the city of Grants Pass. So it was deemed and stood with this court ruling in 2010 that the river was navigable up to just a little bit west downriver of Grants Pass. But anything Grants Pass and up was non-navigable, which means the property owners would own the property to the middle of the river, and public access to the river would not allow for usage up to or below the high water mark. Division of State Lands appealed this in 2015 and overruled the court's decision. However, the decision of the Division of State Lands was also told that they need to go back and they need to reaffirm their findings, and this all needs to be done by December 31st, 2025. So it leaves a little gray area. Some people might interpret one way or the other, but I believe the current state is that the Division of State Lands challenge of the Jackson County Circuit Court still stands, but needs to be reaffirmed by 2025, which is what they're working on. So to provide some additional information, the public's right to get to the banks of the river really is a separate issue. In the absence of restrictions, the public may go to the riverbank at those locations and access the state lands to the high water mark. When the court ruled it was non-navigable back in 2010, those access points that anywhere up and down the river, where it's non-navigable, would provide, say, a 10-foot easement to the river. But then once you're at the river, you have nowhere to go, because technically it's non-navigable, and therefore if you're going up or down the river, even below the high water mark, it would still be private property. So when 2010 occurred, at the same time we were receiving some complaints about some residents in the area that we're talking about, and I have a map here to show some of that, of the uses that were occurring along the river. They would access the points through those neighborhood locations that were deemed an easement for public access, and they would be doing a number of activities on the riverbanks, from tents to sunshades to parties to sexual activities to you name it. They were doing everything, and there was no public infrastructure to accommodate the use of individuals that were utilizing the banks of the Rogue River. So we have a resolution that was passed in 2004, resolution number 5262, that calls out specifically a number of river access easements. The south end of 5th Street, the south end of 8th Street, Elm Street, the south end of that, Riverside Drive, the north end, Annabelle Lane to the north end, Bel Air, which is one we're talking about today, and also Greenwood Avenue, which is the south end, along with any kind of street ends and then pedestrian access easements were all defined in that resolution. But I did list for you in the bullet points the ones that were called out specifically for river access. The Bikeways and Walkways Committee addressed this topic on July 13th and on August 10th. And after 2 meetings, they made a motion to move the topic to City Council for final determination. They were discussing the opportunity of basically reopening or republicizing or reutilization of those access easement points. When this was discovered by some of the neighbors in those areas, members of the public came to present and comment on it, along with those that were in favor. Most of the public was in general, most of the public generally from the surrounding neighborhoods were questioning those access points. Most of the comments were opposed to the easements for the issues that were occurring back in 2010, 2013, with the use of the Rogue River banks. A few comments were in favor just to retain the easements to either because they lived in the neighborhood and they utilized those easements to access the river, and that was something they grew to like, but the majority of them were not in favor of opening those easements up. The Bikeways Committee had several topics that they felt were important for council to consider. And here are the ones that they mentioned. Access points should be discussed as a standalone issue due to the differing site conditions of each exhibit. And I'll go into those three that we were specifically talking about through the Bikeway and Walkway Committee. Public parking and pedestrian facilities are non-existent at all in the three locations that are being discussed, and the committee was concerned about fire and life safety accessibility. Historically, illegal activity did occur in those areas where there were easements to the river. And these access points also created for the public land access along the river, and it would eliminate that or reduce that accessibility to the general public if they were closed. So these are the sort of points that the Bike and Ped wanted council to consider through this discussion. Here on the slide is just an example of an end of Fifth Street, which is mentioned in the resolution from 2004. So as you see, Fifth Street comes down and ends, and it provides a public access to the river for the public. And so we have a few of those street ends that just open up into the river for public access. The three specific locations that the Bike and Ped Committee talked about are listed here in yellow X's, and we're going to go over those. It's Bel Air, it's Rogue, and it's Elm Street. Taking the first one, Elm Street, that was discussed, in 1983, the city was granted a 15-foot pedestrian easement at the end of Elm Lane that runs to the river. It was intended to secure public access to the river and for established fishing holes that were there. So it provided an opportunity for people, when the subdivision was coming in, to continue to get river access. And that's usually how these things occur with planning from a municipality. Is you might have a blank field that's acres large, and someone ultimately ends up deciding to develop that acreage and put in a subdivision, and sometimes municipalities will require a public access to the river to maintain the historical access to the river that was used before the subdivision went in. Sometimes subdivisions put in their own private river access to a common area, and we have examples of both of those in the city. The red X there just is going to show you the next slide, the visual of the picture of the next slide and where you are looking towards the river and what it looks like. So Elm Street is an unimproved street. It does not have a curb and gutter and sidewalk. And it just basically is a single lane paved road that goes down and dead ends at the river. There you see that it's relatively open and you can see the end of the river. But today, if you look at it, we've discovered that there is fencing that closes that access, and a neighbor is utilizing that public easement space to store a trailer and miscellaneous equipment, which technically is a code enforcement issue. The next access that was discussed at Bike and Ped was Southeast Road Drive, shown here in the yellow. Road Drive ends at Bluebird Drive, and there's a 295-foot access point to the river for that river access. So the red X there shows what this next picture will show looking towards the river. What we have here is Road Drive is another unimproved, no curb, gutter, sidewalk, but it's a wider, more like a two-lane street, paved street, that goes all the way down to the river and then dead ends. All of these roads are basically on a dead-end road or a cul-de-sac / dead-end road that goes back to a main road. As you see there's a big RV that's parked there at the time in 2013. The property owner to the west of Elm Street was parking their RV there, which was a code violation, and ultimately we got that resolved. This is what it looks like today. There are now 2 trailers and a vehicle being stored in that public easement, and that would be considered a code violation. along with blocking the easement as it is right now for public access. So the third one Bike and Ped talked about was Bel Air Drive. This is a 10-foot granted pedestrian easement to the river, and it was required of Riverside Garden subdivision back in 1979, likely to preserve historic public access, but I could not find any records that stated the purpose, but that's generally the reason why that occurs. If you take a look at the street here, you can start to see sort of the trail. It's to the right of the light street light pole. This is a more improved street. It's got curb and gutter and sidewalk on one side. There is parking on one side of the street. So from a standpoint in being able to facilitate additional use just for public access, this is the best of the three because it does provide some off-street parking without hindering transportation thoroughfares. Here is a picture of the pedestrian pathway actually there on Bel Air. It is concrete that goes down, and it goes down basically down to the river. And the adjoining property owners on both the left and the right, I believe, have basically like a fence that follows down that path close to the high water mark of the river. So public river access, a Bikeways and Walkways Committee provided the following recommendations. Consider closing Elm Lane access due to the dead-end nature of the street, which they all basically have a dead-end nature. This street is narrow, lacking parking and pedestrian facilities. Consider opening Road Drive and Bel Air Drive to public access, pending consideration from fire, life, and safety about the increase in parking and illegal activities that would result. The fact is these may have been granted as public access easements, but the neighborhoods are not established and set up for the use of the public utilizing those due to the increased influx of individuals, traffic, vehicular traffic, public safety vehicles being able to get in there if there are extra vehicles parked there, and then also there is no real public facilities to accommodate the what once was high use back in 2013 of those sites. Just want to caveat that these are 3 sites. There are some additionals in this throughout the city, not a large number more, but there are, I think, a couple more that are provided through a subdivision that provides public access to the rivers also. So these are just 3, and that may be something you want to consider if you're looking at any kind of policy considerations in the future with regards to this subject. So your call to action is at your discretion. Alternatives is to consider closing Elm Lane access due to the dead-end nature of the street. Consider opening Road Drive and Bel Air Drive to public access. Council can provide additional direction based on discussion, and council can hold additional meetings or require additional public input. And with that, Mayor, I turn it over to you. I will attempt to turn it over to you.
I got it.
Okay.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yep.
All right. Craig, let's go ahead and have you add anything now, and then we'll open it up to the council for questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And that was well represented. The only thing that I would amend, Chairman Yolo, who's not able to be here today, would be to, and I apologize for my video quality, 400 gigs doesn't get you much apparently. The high water mark would be delineated for the homeowners that have property against the river so that they would know where that historic high water mark would be. That was the only addition that he would make for all that was represented moments ago.
Okay, thank you. And just, I know a couple of council members joined late. Craig is with the Bikeways Pathways Committee,
Yes.
Is that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, council, do you have any questions for either Aaron or Craig? Raise your hand on your, Valerie, go ahead.
Referring back to Craig, it mentions that the high water mark would be delineated, but do you have to cross private property to get to, the high water mark?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. other than to say that in regard to the general navigability of the waterway, it would be helpful for the homeowners who abut to the river to know where that is, whether you have to cross private property or not. I think in regard to the easements in question, that's what Keith would recommend.
And I'm also asking, it seems kind of crazy to have delineation down, I guess fencing wise, because you've still got the part where any delineation could be wiped out in high water. Is that correct?
I don't know that for sure. That would probably be a question better suited for a city council member or the city representative.
Thank you.
Hey, Aaron, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just to answer Valerie's first question with regards to, do you have to cross private property to get to the to get to the high water mark? With the easements that are in place, the answer would be no. You have the ability to get to the river without crossing anyone's property, which is a key point also. The other point that has to be discussed at some point is really what the delineation of the river is, if it is navigable or non-navigable, and that's when that gets to be a little deeper of a conversation.
Yeah, so I'm going to comment on that. I'm actually sitting in here with Aaron now. So the court ruling it revert. So the question was navigability from, I think, Grave Creek on up to around Shady Cove, and prior to that, from the mouth up to Grave Creek, it was determined to be navigable a long time ago. And then the more recent study that began in the late 90s by the State Land Board determined navigability from Grave Creek up, as I said, up Shady Cove. So that was the stretch at issue in the Jackson County Circuit Court case in 2008, I believe, where Judge Gretzky in Jackson County overturned that state determination in its entirety. The Oregon Court of Appeals in 2015 stated that the ruling was in part correct and in part wrong. And from what I can glean from that ruling, where it upheld the Jackson County Circuit Court was apparently the notification requirements and delineation, exact delineation of the affected lands was done incorrectly, and the Court of Appeals upheld that determination. And so I don't believe that proper updating and redelineating and notification to the affected landowners has been finalized. And so my belief right now is that we are in limbo, and that navigability is as of now not even yet official. I think that it's a very strong possibility it will be finalized before December 31st, 2025.
2025, yeah.
I don't want to call it a foregone conclusion, but it's very likely that the navigability will be finalized by then. But right now, I'd say it's, as Aaron said, a gray area. It's in limbo at best, and I'd say it's probably the public probably does not have a right just to say, well, this is public property up to the ordinary high water mark.
Brian, you had a question?
So that in itself, it just from a policy perspective, council, that's really important. That in itself would mean that if we were to open up and publicize these as public access points, an individual would be able to walk down the 10-foot easement, stand at the riverbank, look upriver, look downriver. If they moved over more than 5 feet one way or the other, they'd be trespassing. So in essence, that 10-foot easement, all it is just that 10 feet, and it's done. And that would create potential lot of conflict because technically they don't have the ability to go any further than that easement because it's private property.
Thank you. Whose screen are we seeing? If whoever's sharing their screen could not share their screen, that would be great. Brian, if you have a question, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I had two questions. One question is about, it's about the navigability, and I guess this is probably for Aaron or Mark. Historically, the river has been considered navigable ever since that was deemed a thing. You know, I don't know how 50 years ago, 100 years ago, I don't know how long ago that was, but so you're just saying in the period between 2010 and 2015, when the Jackson County Circuit Court chimed in and overturned the Division of State Lands decision, that's the period when it has been determined to be non-navigable. Is that right? And you're muted.
There you go.
All right. So I think the act of determining navigability does take, it takes some bureaucratic determination by the Department of State Lands. And so I don't think it's accurate to say that it was deemed navigable in the past prior to the land board's determination of its navigability that was later appealed. Probably a technicality. I mean, the basis on which the land board determined that it was navigable is, navigability is kind of a term of art, but the land board determined it was navigable based on historic use of the river. But that navigability determination really was not effective until the land board's decision that was appealed. So
you're saying that the navigability of the Rogue River had never been determined by DSL before 2008?
It had been determined from the mouth up to Grave Creek, but had not been officially determined above Graves Creek past that, or I'm sorry, until that time, 2008. Okay. It was prior to 2008, but the circuit court lawsuit with regard to that determination was what happened in 2008.
Okay, gotcha. And then just one other quick question, Aaron, and this is on the other access points that are not a part of this discussion that you mentioned briefly. You showed a slide of that 5th Street right-of-way that goes down to the river. And I just was checking, is that access currently open? I went down there earlier this year and it was locked, so I was just wondering if that had changed since I had been down there.
I think it ultimately was locked, and it probably still is locked, as we were trying to control some of with the court ruling. It was deemed that it was not navigable, but also it was locked because of some safety and security issues we were having down in 5th Street, and this was a preventative measure that was done a number of years ago.
And was this a staff level decision or a council level decision?
I don't recall. It was like back in 2013 that this was done. I'd have to look. It was a discussion point, I know, at council level at some point, as the neighbors were concerned about the illegal activities that were occurring in that area, along with the 8th Street street also.
Okay, thank you.
Joel.
So, Mark, if I understood your legal interpretation correct, this really isn't ripe for discussion until, what, 2024? Are you folks hearing me?
I can hear you fine, but I'm not seeing
Mark?
I'm not seeing Aaron and they're there.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I thought that Councilor King made a statement that this is not right now, and there's, I think, some potential justification for that comment or reality of that comment, as things are still yet to be determined, but that doesn't allow us to be in limbo until 2025. We really do need to take some kind of stance on how we're going to be dealing with these public access easement points that we have within the city.
Yeah, okay, so I understand
And
that, but it would only provide access within the corridor of the easement, which is what, approximately 8 feet wide? And then below the high water mark, is that correct? Well, no, you're not below the high water mark, because it could be private land to the center of the river.
Yeah, well, Mark and I were just talking, those easements, they would allow you to, if you properly, you could stay within the easement and still access the river and put in a kayak or something along those lines and not trespass on public property. So you could, responsible individuals could still utilize that even if it's non-navigable in a way that's responsible without impacting the neighbor property. But it would require additional enforcement efforts on the city's part. In 2013, it was getting pretty bad along Elm Street and Rogue Street and Bel Air, all in those areas. The amount of individuals that were utilizing that was getting extreme. The use was getting pretty extreme down there, along with 5th Street and not 8th Street as much, but there was some additional activity there also.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and we had one of those at the end of our street, and it was the same situation here where I live, and also on Oak Street. Is it also true then that there's plenty of access for people to put in boats, though right now I've heard some comment that like Baker Park and other parks, it's ceasing to be public land and people are hesitant to use it, even though it is public land with river access because of the lack of police resources to ensure that it is public. Is that true? Can anybody confirm or deny that for me? Another way to say that is, do we have adequate police resources to keep the public land public if we increase the amount of public land along the river without overburdening the police and fire resources?
So I'm not to increase it. How would we increase the public land? If you're talking about opening up the easements and publicizing those and taking a stance that the river is navigable, which I think may be going out in front of the state too much, then we would have an issue patrolling areas that the only way to get there is through a 10-foot easement and everyone is hidden from activities because they're in people's, in essence, backyards.
Yeah, I hear you. I personally have experienced that when fishing down there as well. Okay, the other thing I just wanted to confirm, where the developer put in the access, that is a public easement, correct?
Yeah, on the plots that I've looked at, they were, sometimes it seemed like it was initiated by the development wanting to have a neighborhood river access to the subdivision. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it was also mirrored with or initiated by the city saying, if you're going to develop, you need to provide in order for this subdivision to be signed off on.
So legally, which is it? What is the situation today?
Well, each one is a little bit different based on how they were made, but for the most part, the subdivisions that have those all have that written for the most part that is access for the public.
So then, who has jurisdiction over that access? The developer or the city? I would assume that it is the city.
The city has jurisdiction, even if from a standpoint of the easement access, but on some of them, the city would be maybe responsible for maintaining the easement access. And on some of them, if it was done through a homeowners association, the homeowners association may be responsible for maintaining access for the subdivision, and the city would be just responsible for maintaining easement access.
Okay.
See, so it's as clear as the Rogue River in wintertime.
Okay. The last question I had was with fire issues and law enforcement issues, what is the liability of the city especially given the street access and the conditions for parking, and say somebody needs an ambulance or somebody needs fire service to their house because it's burning down. What's the city liability associated with that, if any?
Am I unmuted?
There you go.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the liability aspect. I mean, if someone's illegally parked, if that's creating the log jam, that's, you know, the bad act of another, and that generally does not confer liability upon someone else. Furthermore, when you provide public recreational access, you have recreational immunity, so that would protect us from liability with regard to the public using the easement to recreate.
Okay, so given the lack of liability, then there would probably be the ethical requirement to enforce parking laws, as you talked about, and the resources required to keep it public and to enforce those parking laws on those streets. Okay. I'm headed into beyond questioning. Okay, thank you.
I see your hand, Rick, but it's not your turn quite yet. Craig, did you have something to add?
Yes, thank you. Again, representing the committee, and I wanted to make this body aware of the general public concern. There was a large number of people that attended the Bike and Ped committee meeting on August 10th to voice their deep concerns about these easements. We've addressed the Elm Street or the Elm Lane with the fire access and the public safety issues there, but even with Rogue Drive and Bel Air Drive, I wanted to just read this into this record to represent the people that were there as residents of these neighborhoods to voice their concerns about the bad actors, if you will, or the things that we've discussed where people are not recreating in a way that's healthy to the community with vandalism, illegal drugs, littering, so forth. So I just wanted to make sure that this body heard their voice because there was a lot of deep concern for the reopening of this access, and I wanted to make sure that their voice was represented here as well.
All right, thank you. And we have heard from some of those people as well. And if this goes on to a business meeting, we'll have more opportunity for public comment as well. Rob is up next, and then Rick.
Yeah, Aaron, you mentioned that if we were to open that up, you talked about additional law enforcement required, and how do you see that manifesting? In other words, is it nonstop? Is it on some kind of circular loop, so to speak? Do they go around and inspect every so often? Is it just on a complaint-driven basis? But when you said we would need additional enforcement, what do you see?
Well, that's a great question, Counselor. And we would definitely need additional services in those areas. And the chief is really, because I haven't had a lot of time to talk in detail about that specific question. Maybe the chief can chime in. Chief Hensman, do you have a general idea of a response for Counselor Pell's question?
Yeah, I think it's a great question as we kind of navigate our way through this, knowing well that we're understaffed right now, and as we see a increase in violent type crimes and just nuisance crimes in general, in comparison to all the rest of the chores we have to deal with, it would be something we'd have to put our heads together and figure out. And then reminding council too that we froze 2 officer positions and just trying to recoup those losses as well. Obviously, the less we could bring upon ourselves, the better with the resources we currently have. Also taking into consideration that we are significantly understaffed right now, and we're trying to rebuild the team with a lot of new officers that still have to go to the police academy. which has been pushed back yet again. So by the time we get our newer hires even trained, we're looking at about 18 months from now. So it's definitely something that would be concerning to me as the chief, to bring upon the officers, the men and women here, additional duties that we're struggling just maintaining what we have currently.
Yeah, I guess that doesn't really, I appreciate the picture you lay out, Chief, and it's good for the council to understand that. It didn't really answer my question as far as what, if you were fully staffed, we'll say, what would additional enforcement look like? In other words, in 18 months, hopefully, what kind of additional enforcement are we actually, measures would you think would be appropriate?
Yeah, I think it would be no different than what we're currently doing with our parks. Let's use our community response team right now. So we have 2 officers that are dedicated to downtown nuisance and parks nuisance type issues. So they rotate around the parks and downtown on a complaint basis, but also too just on a regular patrol basis. So we would do the same thing as discretionary time becomes available to our officers, to our resources. We would just put that on their, quite frankly, list of things to do. If we have problem areas, that's where we would go during that discretionary time. So that would just be built into the normal duties of a police officer.
Thank you.
All right, Rick.
Okay, Joel and Rob basically answered my questions or asked the questions as well. And I do have some discussion items for later. Thank you.
All right, does anyone else have any questions before we move into discussion?
Yeah, Sarah, this is Rob. Sorry to raise my hand. Craig mentioned that he had statements that he wanted to read from the people that were at that meeting. So is that not appropriate for today, or what do we do with those statements?
Hi, this is Craig. I didn't need to, Councilman, I wasn't wanting to read the statements. I was just wanting to represent their voice in a general way.
Thank you.
Brian, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I was, I'll wait till discussion.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? All right, I think we are ready to move into discussion. How about you start, Rick, and then we'll go to Brian.
Okay, I was on the city council in 2013 when we reviewed this, and we were real concerned. The public was coming to us and expressing their frustrations with burglary, the trash that was down there, drug activity, also the excessive noise that was occurring from the partying and other illegal activity. And consequently, the council at that time felt it was appropriate to close all of that off, as well as other evidence concerning the high water mark. So I personally feel the same position would be appropriate today, especially now that our public safety is even stretched further. To add additional items to the plate would not be appropriate. Thank you.
Brian, then Valerie.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, just to respond to what Rick just said, if we're gonna close access to the river every time we see people partying or doing something that we may or may not like, we may as well just close the entire river down. So I don't know about that, but I did want to say a few things. I'm the liaison to Bikeways and Walkways. And the first thing I wanted to say is I wanted to thank Bikeways and Walkways for taking this issue on. It completely ate up 2 months of their meetings. They took on an immense amount of public comment. And if anyone's interested in listening to that, I would suggest just going to the audio recording of the meeting and you can listen to those public comments. But the presentation was pretty accurate. There's the 3 different access points. 2 of them are narrower, and then one of them is actually wider. One of them is a right-of-way, so it's not the narrow path. It's actually a wider, and that is the Rogue Drive. And the Elm Lane one, that was the one that had the photo with the trailer, and it's the narrow one-way unimproved street. It personally makes sense to me. And before I say this, I will say that I am not in favor of restricting river access. You know, on most of you are familiar with Chip Dennerline. He's on Bikeways Committee. He has a saying that Grants Pass is the best little river town in the U.S. And, you know, the best little river town in the U.S. shouldn't be closing off river access. And I'm inclined to agree with him. However, for Elm Lane specifically, that road is so narrow. I feel there are issues with that. The neighbors and the committee also feels there's issues with having that specific access point open. So I would accept possibly closing the Elm Street one just because it's very narrow. However, the other 2, they are more accessible. The one on Bel Air has plenty of street parking. The one on Rogue Drive has street parking and is a wider access. I don't know how. I'm not in a hurry necessarily to open these. I think maybe eventually they should be opened. I'm not saying I want to open them right now, but I guess that's kind of where I'm at a high level. Thanks.
All right, Valerie and then Joel. And I might encourage you all, since we have not heard from the public on this issue very much, to just maybe make a decision today about whether we are interested in pursuing this issue and moving it to a public hearing or a council action item rather than coming up with a decision today. Valerie, go ahead.
Well, if that's the case, I would just like to say, to me, navigable means boats. And so I'm going to let the Division of State go through their process. I think that's really important. I think we are way ahead of having this discussion because I do think it all comes down to navigable. I do believe that there are plenty of places for people to get in a boat. I go in my little Tahiti, get up Pierce Riffle, go down through town. If I need to get off the river and dump my Tahiti because I've taken on water, I think that the people on the river would, no matter where, would allow that to happen. And that has to be with navigability. I do not believe just going down and standing and looking at the water has anything to do with navigation. And particularly looking at the strain that this will put on our public safety department, I am not in favor of bringing this any further.
Joel, then Rob.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think the decision is ripe for discussion, to be honest with you. The legal matter doesn't depend on my opinion, and it won't be finally determined into 2024. I'm not sure we want to get ahead of that. The other thing is we have a judge's injunction on parkland and private land on public land that limits our enforcement. We've in a place where we've had problems before. We have some fire and police access and resource issues in terms of the amount that is needed. So I don't think we need to bring it before council either. I want to share with you my personal experience with it. When they had it down here, we bought our house because it had access to the river. And I was used to fishing over at Agnes when we lived in a small community, Powers, and I loved fishing the Rogue River. And I would use that access to go down to the river. And eventually it got to be a campground with bonfires in the summertime and that kind of thing, of people that were using it as a residence, not a public ground. And I experienced in my car probably 4 to 5 burglaries. My car that was parked on the street was completely eliminated once the access was taken away, and then I use other places to get down to the river and fish. I just to keep it a little lighthearted, I got to let you know one of the things they stole from the vehicle was not an Oregon duck. It wasn't an Oregon duck gym bag. They had their choice. They could have taken the duck gym bag or the Oregon State gym bag, and they took the Oregon State gym bag because it was more valuable. I just had to let you know that. Anyway, I don't think I don't need it coming before the council.
Rob, you're up next.
Yeah, I'd like to ask if Rick could repeat what he said earlier about what I guess he had seen when he was on the council several years back. Could you repeat that, Rick?
Sure. Neighbors came. Betty King was one of the people that used to live down there, and she used to go along the river with a trash bag collecting things that had been left behind. She said there'd be broken beer bottles. They would find needles as well. In fact, she said at one point the neighbors, I guess, got together and had some hazmat people come in and actually do a cleanup in that area because they felt some of the trash there was too hazardous. But she said people were conducting sex and drugs and so forth. So it was on that basis when the city council heard that, we did not feel it was appropriate to have those accesses open, and we closed them. And as Joel pointed out now, when they closed the access, then burglary and things no longer were a problem.
Thank you.
Okay.
You know, I'm probably, I'm going to say, I definitely very much appreciate what the chief had to say, Chief Hensman, and I definitely respect that, and I think I understand. Beyond that, I think that I'm also inclined to, I guess, agree with Joel and Valerie that until 2024, until this is adjudicated, we're kind of ahead of ourselves. But with those things said, I also would like to hear from from the people that spoke at the Bikeways and Walkways Committee. I would like to give them their time in front of the council. I'd like to, hear exactly what it is they're saying. And I'm going to admit that I have not gone down to those. I was negligent. I should have gone down and actually visited those spots myself, which I would do before a public hearing. But I'm kind of leaning towards, well, put it this way, I've listened carefully to what the chief said and what the legal framework or legal timetable is. Nonetheless, I would like to hear from the public. I think it's reasonable to let them speak before the council. I just didn't get a good enough sense from Craig today how every one of those people, because they might all be slightly different, they might be individuals. I'd like to hear from all of them, and I would actually support having a public hearing on it. And seeing, how where I'm leaning after I've actually heard from everybody.
Thank you. Joel, you're next, and then Valerie.
I have to search for that mute button every time. The other thing I wanted people to know, I have neighbors that live along the river here by Oak Street. Even without public easement, there's issues. This one lady who lives by herself, she's had people poop on her back porch. And then I was talking with about 3 houses down. We don't actually live on the river, but 3 houses down. He was walking out in the street one night, and They were camping down below his house. This is on the north side of the river, and there was no public access. And he had a lady come to his door at 2 in the morning and ring the doorbell, and was looking for somebody that wasn't there, and then left a bunch of stuff behind in his front yard. So even without public access, there's issues, and I would not want to at this point in time. I don't think it's the time is right. I do want to keep the public access legally so that we could do it in the future, but now is not the right time to open it up.
All right, Valerie?
I'm going to agree with that, and I'm also going to come back to, it sounds like when these neighborhoods were established and say, it sounds like the access was not put in necessarily for the public in general. I think it was put in for maybe the neighborhoods that were in that area, and they felt. So I liked somebody had mentioned homeowner associations, where there is a responsibility that comes with the right, or, you know, get to know your neighbor and maybe talk to them and ask them if maybe you can use it for fishing or whatever. To me, that is the only thing that I can see really happening at this point, because especially as Joel brought out where we are right now with public lands, I think we are opening a bigger issue, and right now I will go with Warren. This is not something that we can deal with at this time. So it comes back down to, this may be a discussion to be had, but until 2024 and it's laid out pretty more clearly from the state lands, I just think that we are opening a hornet's nest.
Okay, it's going to be Brian and then Rob, but at this point, we've heard from Joel and Valerie each 2 times that they're not interested in having it go forward. Rob is interested in holding a public hearing, but isn't necessarily interested in opening it up at this time. But I think if this is not an issue that's going to go forward, we can stop talking about it. So it'd be great to hear from some other people. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I would go ahead and agree with Joel and Valerie that this isn't a topic we should be taking up right now. I think we should wait until the Department of State Lands reaffirms the findings. That could happen next year, it could happen in 2022. It just has to happen before 2025. So I would probably choose to defer this until they have done so. And then I just also wanted to say to Rob, Rob, if you're interested in hearing what those neighbors have to say, there's just about 2 hours of public comment recorded already. I would really encourage you and any counselor to listen to that public comment as opposed.
Maybe we have 2 issues here. We've got the issue of, do we want to open these access points? Or I would also say we've got the issue of giving the public access to the council. And to me, I would actually, you know, like to have a public hearing on it. But, and I understand, Valerie, what you're saying about a potential hornet's nest. But if the people make their case strongly enough, I mean, that decision could go in either direction. But so I'm all for the people having public access to the council at a meeting. But I also understand the challenges that the police chief is going to face, you know, for the next couple of years. So anyway, I'm ready to vote on whether or not we move it forward. But again, to me, public access to the council is the other thing that we're talking about here.
All right, well, at this time, nobody's, except for you, Rob, has really expressed any interest in moving it forward. So I think that this is probably off the table for the time being. Craig, thanks to you and the committee for listening to the public and working through the issue. But at this time, I'm just not hearing any support for having the council take any further action on this. I'm not seeing any hands raised to disagree with me, so I guess we will just move on to the next item on our agenda is the Urban Renewal Agency.
Yeah, good morning, Mayor, members of the council. This is Brad. And I will go ahead and share my screen here. The packet that you've received. Okay,
Looks good.
good to go? All right.
Yes.
So this is an item that you are in many ways, you're wearing your hat as the Urban Renewal Agency board members. The conversation is focused on discussing potential grant guidelines and process for supporting private sector projects. So I think this is kind of the new piece that the council will be talking about today. Most of what we've had to date has really been what are the priority projects within the Urban Renewal District that the Urban Renewal Board feels are important, and you've done some shifting of the plan itself. But today's conversation is really about those private sector projects that would be coming through the Urban Renewal Agency. And the relationship to your council goal is to provide cooperative, shared leadership involving council staff and the community. So the purpose really is those projects in the Urban Renewal Plan that are accessed by and leveraged through private sector partners, not that adopted UR project list. Obviously, there's some crossover here today. We'll be talking about that list. But I think the reason that this was put on the agenda was to kind of talk about how best to assist the development community with these funds. And I did want to put right up front a key assumption being the Urban Renewal Agency desires at least a portion of the current UR funding to be made available to private sector business and not reserved solely for city-initiated projects. So what I'm getting at there is there are some urban renewal agencies around the state that have chosen to utilize their funds just for the capital projects that are city initiated, like sewer and water projects, street projects, lighting projects, that ultimately assist private sector development with frontage improvements and things like that. But they're still driven by and managed by the city and or the city's contractors. So this is a key assumption we wanted to put right up front. This next slide is really just kind of a quick overview of where we're at with the urban renewal plan and the district. There's 105 million over 30 years of maximum indebtedness for the agency. And as of July, approximately 2.3 million is the fund balance. And then the table at the bottom of the slide there is taken from the budget that was adopted by the Urban Renewal Agency in July. And the main reason I put that there is so you could be reminded that last year, FY21, there were specific allocations to those projects. And this year in the FY22, we just bottom line those so that there's a new line just called other capital outlay, and it gives the agency a lot more flexibility for how these are spent. So you're not obligated with the current fund balance to spend those amounts that are in the FY21 column. That can be spent however the board desires. So the ORS 475.170 has a number of different ways that urban renewal funds can be spent. And in red, that third bullet is highlighted the private sector initiated projects. So that is certainly a item or a way that money can be spent through the district, typically through grants and loans, as we'll talk about later. The bottom there is showing some of the cities that we looked at, how they are currently, what their approach is to spending money. So you can see whether two of them give loans, three of them give grants, and then they all use the funds for city-initiated, city-designed projects. Bend, they actually have three different urban renewal districts in Bend, and they're using grants for one of those. In Eugene, they have two different urban renewal districts, and they're using loans for one and then city-initiated in the other. Pendleton's actually doing all three. So when it comes to today's topic and how can these funds be best utilized and leveraged by the private sector, the adopted plan doesn't really give much guidance on how those revenues can be administered. It does set forth these goals and objectives, which are not really ranked or prioritized, and those are listed at the bottom there. But it doesn't go into really detail on exactly how those would be administered. So it has brought up the question, and that's this question being, why is it necessary to create urban renewal grant guidelines now? And I think there's three main reasons for that. One is an uptick in the number of inquiries from the development community. Our office has received over the last year a number of them. Just, folks generally here in Grants Pass, but a couple outside as well that say, we understand the city has an urban renewal agency. How can we apply for and access those funds to help our project? We have gotten some of those questions. There's, as you know, as the budget overseeing policy board, there's been increases in the URA fund balance each year since it's been created. And then I think the third reason is to demonstrate an early success. This can be a very powerful thing when you see a project, especially one that is, at a very visible location, which can encourage and foster new investment. So up to this point, the main activities that staff has taken to kind of explore this topic further is consulting with Elaine Howard. She is the city's urban renewal agency consultant, asking her thoughts about how these funds could be utilized in this manner. We've also researched best practices of some other Oregon urban renewal agencies listed there. We have done some preliminary drafting of guidelines for 6 projects that are in the urban renewal plan. And lastly, we did hold a urban renewal district stakeholder brainstorming meeting just last month. And that was held on August 18th. Susan Seawriter and myself facilitated a 2-hour discussion with 6 individuals who had previously expressed an interest or had demonstrated a prior interest in the urban renewal agency. And those individuals are Kelly Oslin, Tom Fisher, Carl Johnson, Sean Ward, J.R. Wheeler, and Chris Woodburn. It was a very, very helpful discussion for us just to kind of hear from their perspective how they felt the city and the Urban Renewal Agency Board could make these funds available to help them the most. The whole purpose of this meeting wasn't to come up with any answers. It was really just brainstorming and to have a conversation. So here's some of the key takeaways from that meeting. I won't go through all of these. I did want to point out the first one there, use these, make them available for fire suppression and seismic upgrades. I think the council's well aware this is one of the areas where the city has previously had economic development grants available. We don't have that as a specific category in the urban renewal plan, other than there are some projects that for building upgrades, and so that could potentially fit that. There was a lot of consensus around that third one down on the right column, of building in lots of flexibility for owners and investors. I think the point being that if it's difficult to know who's going to be coming in, who's really ready to proceed, and we can't really forecast that. And so if we just set up the programs that allows for the private sector to come in and use these funds. In our research, these are kind of some guiding principles that have come out as being kind of best practice, if you will, in this urban renewal field. And the focus on job creation, retention, build housing, grow business is all very important and sort of in the mission. Not making the funds available for operation and maintenance is another consistent theme, and that's actually in the statute. Focusing on one-time expenses, requiring some skin in the game, as they say, came out from the group and is very important, I think, for getting that long-term commitment. Having the applicant show up front how they're going to add value to the property. Again, that's one of the core principles of the urban renewal, is to build that property value over time. Setting maximum grant amounts and or loan amounts, that's one of the topics for council today, is to give some guidance on that. Projects should be consistent with other plans, don't duplicate other economic development grants, and then supporting clearly defined realistic projects. So the yellow boxed items there, this chart is taken out of our adopted plan. And several of those really are going to be only city initiated, but the ones that are in yellow are the ones that likely either 100% privately driven or, a majority probably would be driven by the private sector or private property owners. The point of this was really just to kind of show you the proportionality. There's of those 6 projects that are highlighted there, that adds to $20,250,000. Again, that's the amount of money over the 30-year life of the plan. And the Town Center Plaza, you'll see, was not highlighted. Obviously, that's kind of both. We had that discussion a couple of months ago at council, and for the time being was decided, not to do a lot with until we get some more feedback from the community. So here's just a little bit of breakdown on how those 6 projects look in terms of the allocation and the percentage of the total urban renewal funding there. Again, it's of the total, around that 40% would be presumed to be made available for private sector application. So again, tying into why we're here today, we don't have currently any clear or predictable guidelines. We don't have an application form that we can just hand out to people that says, here's what you need to fill out in order to access these funds. In terms of the question about loans and grants, so this was one of the topics that was brought up at that stakeholder meeting I mentioned. And the recommendation, well, the thought, there really isn't a formal recommendation out of that group, but the thought was that the loans, while they can extend the life of the urban renewal program, and like I said, other communities are using them, and they can potentially, make more resources available. If you loan out money and it's paid back, then that money that's paid back is put into almost like a revolving loan that other people can access. But there is a pretty high administrative cost to administering that. Likely not something that the city would do, but we would probably contract with another agency to help manage those loans if you chose to go that way. But some of the financial industry professionals do believe that adding an urban renewal agency loan could unnecessarily complicate and maybe add greater risk to borrowers. If you've already got a commercial loan and then you add an urban renewal loan on top of that, that can sometimes add some complexity unnecessarily to the review process on the private side. And so for this and other reasons, our current position is to focus on the grants. So the last few slides here just kind of talk about what would that look like. What would these grants look like that are given through the Urban Renewal Agency? And one of the key ones is setting a maximum grant award, again, so that kind of helps extend out the life of these projects a little bit. Having one grant per tax lot, so that again, there's not a duplication. Now that would obviously depend on if someone has two tax lots with a building over both of them, we would need to make some exceptions. But for the most part, that would be our recommendation. Have a dollar for dollar match, and then grant funds can't be applied to costs incurred prior to the award. In terms of who could apply, they need to be an owner of the property, fee title, or somebody that maybe has a land sale contract that's in process, and they just are doing their due diligence, and they want to know if they can have this urban renewal money. That would be another eligible recipient. Obviously, the property has to be inside the Grants Pass Urban Renewal District boundaries. And some of those projects, you even have to be in a sub area. So like on 6th and 7th Street, if you were going to tap that money, that would be defined there. You have to be appropriately zoned. And then the bottom there are some activities. And I think those are going to vary quite a bit depending on, if you're going for the affordable housing line or if you're going to go for the building rehab line or project, that those would all change. But those are some pretty common eligibility factors that are used around the state. And then we also have some conditions that would apply to these projects. Applicants need to maintain improvements, typically for 5 years. That's not a set in stone number, but seems to be a good best practice. And then if required, work should be done under a building permit issued by the City of Grants Pass. You have to pay all your taxes and fees before you can apply. And then evidence of property insurance is required. So a lot of more technical kinds of things that would be upfront during the application process. In getting to the process, there's the question that we talked about a couple of months ago with the economic development grants, the ones that are not necessarily inside the urban renewal district. We had some conversation about having the reviews of the grant applications be at the staff level, city manager level, city council level. I think that same question applies here for the urban renewal grants. And we would, from our standpoint, and I think from the community standpoint, it would be nice to make those the same. So you were leaning towards a tiered system, so certain grants, say below 25,000, would be reviewed and could be approved at staff, and then above would maybe go to the board. One of the key things there is if we're asking for a lot of financial information in the application process, what we've been hearing is that there can be a hesitancy on behalf of some businesses to not give that information or to not apply because that all becomes public record versus having it being reviewed at the staff level. Then that doesn't get presented in a public forum. So the main cost implications, the urban renewal has anticipated annual revenues. LB 6381, the general fund, is non-renewable resource there. That actually, I think that's a carryover from another one. And we do have some staff resources obviously involved with this, all of which can be paid through the urban renewal agency. And there's really no specific date on this. We just fully anticipate some more conversation unless council just wants to to move ahead with these basic parameters. But that's what staff has for you, Mayor.
Thank you, Brad. Council, what questions do you have? Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. This question's actually for Aaron. So I was pretty excited that we were going to be talking about the urban renewal today. I requested months ago to have this on the agenda, and I was pretty surprised to see that this is the presentation we got, when the presentation that was asked for months ago had to do with the project list and more surrounding that. So I'm just wondering how this got put ahead of that when that was requested by council months ago.
Good afternoon, Councilor. As you may see on the schedule, September 27th, we have the LB project list. So we'll be discussing in detail those LB project lists as requested by council. This was also an item that was just on the calendar for a long time, along with the LB projects. It slowly worked its way up the schedule, and we're talking about this one today, and we're talking about LBs next Monday.
Okay, thank you. I do believe the LB project discussion is a different conversation than the urban renewal project discussion, but I see where you're coming from. And then I had another question for you, Aaron. On August 18th, staff facilitated a 2-hour discussion with those 6 individuals about the URA, and it's a pretty high-profile list of developers in the community. I don't recall, is that something that council asked to have happen, or is that something that was initiated by staff?
Brad, you want to talk about that, our process for getting the additional information for this presentation?
Sure. Yeah. Well, this kind of relates, Councilor De La Grange, to your first question about how this got on, and I think the staff, the community development staff, has been focused on how we can best come up with a recommendation to the council for administering urban renewal funds, and this ties into the other grants that you also had. And as we were talking that through, as we were talking with with Elaine Howard, the consultant, we realized that the best resource that we have are those that are already here in the community doing the work. So to answer your question, we thought we just have that informal conversation with them in order to bring you a more informed recommendation. So that was driven by staff, not coming from the council.
Okay, thank you. I would have liked to have known about that ahead of time. I would have likely attended that meeting. So thank you.
Yep.
All right, it looks like Joel and then Valerie.
Okay, I just had a clarification from staff. So we've had several people that have already have an inquiry in with the city for urban renewal funds. Is that correct? And we did not have a process set up for it.
Yes, that is correct.
So there's a purpose and need for doing this, regardless of who did it or whatever. Could you share with us, just in general, what type of projects were already being proposed? Like, were they housing? What kind of projects were they? And the reason I'm asking is richness of relationships overcomes scarcity of resources. So when you have a partnership between a government and a private enterprise to achieve public goals, it can be a very powerful coalition. So what kind of things have they already applied for or inquired about, because we don't have any process?
Okay, I'm doing fine. Like I said, my brain.
Really worried about it.
I know, and I thank you for that, but my brain had to reset. I'm just saying.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Councilor King, so we've had inquiries related to redevelopment of the old US Bank building. We've had inquiries about the affordable housing program that is in the plan. We've had some inquiries about related to the industrial area off of M Street. There's a couple of parcels over there. The main one we've talked about has some code enforcement issues related to existing buildings, and they want to grow their business, but they're kind of strapped with having to upgrade the existing buildings to bring them up to code before they can really expand and add some jobs. So they were asking about using the fund for that. There's been an out-of-state inquiry related to that property that you added to the urban renewal district from a multifamily developer. They're off of Terry Lane and D, that 5 acres over kind of near Winco. So those are kind of some. It's kind of all over the map. Some redevelopment, some enhancement of existing buildings, some bringing them up to meet code.
So it sounds like several of these projects would meet our strategic plan, and we would need a process in place to process those proposals.
Yeah, exactly. And that process, if the council is looking at loans, that's a very different process than grants. And again, do you want to be the review board for that? Do you want staff to handle that? Do you want it to be kind of a hybrid committee of the Urban Renewal Agency board that is set aside and created to just meet? It's very important to be responsive in the economic development world pretty quickly. Often somebody will want to, be able to move within a matter of weeks. Time is money, and so that's an advantage to having either a set aside subcommittee or having it be at staff level. So all of that to say, yeah, we really would like to have a much more formalized process set up so that we can begin having these more productive conversations with the development community.
That's exciting, Brad. One thing about the private sector, they get things done. I've been in government my whole life. Sometimes we struggle a little bit with that. So anyway, okay, thank you.
You bet.
All right, Valerie, then Rob.
Yes, if I'm not mistaken, was it 2018 or 2019 that the urban renewal actually went into, was finalized?
16.
Was it 16? Okay, so I was just going to say, I have been on this urban renewal board since its very beginning, and I am very excited to see this process happen because I personally have been out selling, when I'm involved with economic committees, which government affairs, BRE, and whatever, selling this as a tool that we have. And this is kind of like the missing piece that allows us to start utilizing and getting things done. Because when this urban renewal agency was built and promoted in the beginning, it was promoted as a means by which to bring in, to help private enterprise expand and because as Joel said, they get things done a lot faster than we do. So that's how this whole thing was sold, basically, was on the means by which this is a tool that you can use to bring in economic benefits to our community. So I thank you for going out and taking the lead with those people who came to you and said, what is the process that needs to be lined up? Because I do think that is the missing piece right now. So I just want to thank you for that, because I think that is what we need to do, is to get that process established to let those private business people know how to use this tool to benefit our community. So that was just my comment. And I was just trying to remember whether it was clear back in 2016 is what I first came up with, but then I thought surely it hasn't been 4 years, 5 years that we've been sitting in it and not had a process. So thank you for stepping forward with that.
Absolutely.
Rob, you're up.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I definitely appreciate that. We'll say the ball got rolling, so to speak, with this meeting. But I would also like to say that the fact that I don't believe council was informed of the meeting, or that anyone in the general public was informed. I think that any counselor that had an interest, whether it's Brian, and this actually interests me quite a bit also, but should have absolutely been had the opportunity to be in that room. I would also go so far as to say that had the meeting been more publicly announced, that there could have been several other private sector people that would have shown up to sit in that room as well. So I understand that if the process is too big in the beginning, it may not go anywhere. But by the same token, quite frankly, the fact that some of our, we'll say, major or big money players are there while no one else is, to me, just, makes me suspicious of potential favoritism down the line. So, and that all could be completely dissolved by having had this more thoroughly publicly announced, so that counselors or possibly some other private sector people could have attended had they chosen. And I would hope that in the future it's a more open and transparent process. Thank you.
Looks like Aaron wanted to jump in there.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I think we're starting to dive into a conversation here that I'm really interested in getting some more clarity on. A council themselves has said, hey, thank you, Brad, for going the extra effort and getting some general background. And we had some council members saying, well, I wasn't aware of the meeting. I should have been there. And the fact is, staff was just doing their due diligence, trying to come up with some information to provide you with a more informed decision, discussion items, so you can make an informed decision. We do that with calling neighboring cities and seeing what they do for collective bargaining, to any kind of water rates, to whatever it is. We're gathering industry leaders or individuals to be able to give you information to move forward, so you can tell us where you'd like to go. I'm actually, Mayor, would like to, maybe we need to have a discussion at some point about expectations on this in the future, because I'm a little perplexed right now about some council members questioning the due diligence of staff to try to provide information to you to make an informed decision.
All right. Yeah, we can take that under consideration. I thought we would be discussing more of the list as well. I guess it's hard to know. We never know exactly what's going to happen, with a presentation. And yeah, sometimes people are caught off guard because they were expecting something different than what they get. But we just have to move forward from here. Go ahead, Joel.
Okay, hang on here. Okay, you can hear me. Okay.
I can hear you.
So, we can move forward with that comment and just direct before we make a decision to open up a similar meeting with the committee members and or council members could attend if they wanted to, and other people in the community could attend if they want to before we make a decision. So I just viewed it as a sensing thing to help us get it further down the funnel to make a decision. And as we go further down the funnel, if we need to get more public input and not just count on those people as we do it, at least we would have a hypothesis we could bounce off the rest of the people and open it up to them. And and do that before we make a decision, and that would be an easy thing to do. It does take staff resources, though. Omar may frown at me.
I'm not sure who Omar is, but thanks. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to actually make it clear, because maybe I didn't earlier. Brad, I actually appreciate the job that it appears, you've done here, getting the ball started and getting it rolling and bringing this to us. I definitely appreciate that. I guess my comment should have been more clearly focused to Aaron earlier. I'm not going to blame staff for trying to do a good job, but and it appears as if they may have started what will end up being a fruitful and good job down the line. But Aaron, I'm going to focus. I guess my comment to you is that I don't feel that this should have been. I think you should have actually had a little more oversight here, and not just had such a small group invited. And I'm not going to again in any way say anything disparaging about your staff for actually doing this, but I would say that you need to be a little bit more inclusive in the future when giving staff direction. Thank you.
Valerie.
Landmines.
Yeah, I'm just going to go and say that I think that the purpose of the group that they put together was just to get their input on where to begin. I don't think that group or whatever was anything more than talking to a few businesses to kind of give a certain direction. I think in the future, and I think it was even one of the recommendations that they put together some subcommittee that includes counselors as well as business people to move forward. So I would just really like to see it move forward as stated here. And one of, like I said, the recommendations was to put together some sort of a subcommittee that involves counselors as well as stakeholders in the community, because I just really want to see this move forward. And if that helps, I just would like, I think we can do that today without worrying about the beginning.
Brian.
Are we still in questions or are we on discussion?
Oh, I think we're well beyond questions, but if you have a question, go ahead and ask it.
I don't. I have discussion.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think we all need to remember that the urban renewal district is still very young, and we don't have that much money in there right now. I believe we have like $2.2 million, and it's growing at a very slow pace. It grows slower at the beginning. And we've already got some things in there that we want to do. We've got Caveman Pool in there. That's a $5 or probably more $1 million project now, honestly. And there's other things in there that are very quickly going to eat away at that money. So I have big concerns about opening up this to private grant applications at this early stage of the urban renewal agency, when it is still very weak, it's not growing very quickly, and we already have some things in there that we want to spend the money on. So while I do think that this is probably going to be a worthwhile idea to explore as the agency grows and gets stronger, I feel like it's a little bit too early to be taking this aspect of it on. Thanks.
All right, thanks. What other questions do people have or comments? I guess at this point, a lot of the presentation today was focused on private grant program and private partnerships. Brian just indicated he thinks that's not not the direction we should focus on at this time. So I guess I'd be interested to hear what the rest of you think. And I see Valerie. I'll get you next, Rick, and then we'll go to Joel.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep this short. I'm once again going to say that in the beginning, this was promoted as a tool to help private industry. And I think that, yes, I do agree Caveman Pool is something that we have put there, but I really feel that the whole goal of this is down the road to include private enterprise. And so we've seen right now, it's taken us 6 years just to begin to talk about it. So I don't think anything is going to happen very quickly, but I think putting this in the place of beginning to talk with private people and let them know it's out there is really important, because it is sold as a means by which private enterprise is given tools to clean up blight and do things to their buildings. And I don't want it to come across as something that the city simply wants to use. So I think this is a good time to open up the conversation moving forward, including the private enterprise.
Let's get Rick and then Joel.
Okay, I agree with the discussion we're having today, especially the presentation saying the standards should be set and guidelines for how the money will be given out and be eligible. I also feel that if we have small grants that can start showing some progress on urban renewal, I think that would be a real advantage, rather than hold up everything for these large projects. And while I recognize and see the value of the city participating, whether it's Caveman Pool or other projects that may be personal in nature to us, I don't feel the city should be hogging those funds for that purpose. Those funds, as Brian stated, will grow later, and maybe those projects need to come on board later. But I guess for the money we've accumulated now, I would like some sort of consideration by the council to start distributing in the form of small grants or something to show that there is action. Thank you.
Joel?
Well, I actually agree with everybody's comments. And I'm going to try to bring it together for you. Strategically, we look at the urban renewal project total budget. And so Brian's right. You need to look at all the projects, and we do that not when we're looking at any specific project like this is or specific category, but we do that overall. And we've already done that. And so you look at, and then the other thing that I think is a fact is that when you have urban renewal projects, so you have so much money collected now, but you can also bond things. And so when you have a capital investment that is beyond what your present cash is in there, then you just issue bonds for it, and it's backed by the urban renewal district, which is a low interest bond. And that was taken into account when we put together the urban renewal budget. And so at this point in time, say we want to limit something because we haven't done the budget for the urban renewal thing that includes these other capital investments, I don't think it's true. It's a case of, and I hesitate to say this, but it's a case of you can do both. So, and that's why we did the budget. So it's not one or the other. You can do both. And then when we looked at the budget and put it together, that's what the purpose of that was for. And we're not here to say, well, with that budget, if you spend this, then you can't spend this other part of the budget. We're not saying that. We're just implementing part of the budget and getting it going, like Brad talked about, to have some success here, so people can see where that money's going and what it's going to do as a positive force in our community. So I'm okay with proceeding ahead, and and if the council wants to do a second focus group, that's fine, as long as we have staff time to do that. But I think we need to move ahead and honor our previous work with urban renewal budget.
Vanessa and then Brian.
Thank you, Mayor. To answer the questions of the presentation today of the direction that staff is looking for, I have a couple thoughts. I am in support of grants being available only for housing development and loans for any other project types. I do understand the concern that private industry may have of providing their financial statements, but I would like to remind the council that these are tax dollars. So this is private industry asking for publicly funded dollars. So I think that there is a responsibility of the Urban Renewal Agency Board to be good stewards of those taxpayer dollars. I do support a URA project review committee with a potential composition of one or more city councilors, a UAPC member, a CEDC member, the finance director, the CD director, and a business advocate. Of course, I'm flexible on that, but that was the recommendation from an April 2nd presentation on this topic that I did agree with. I agree with the committee meeting on a regular schedule and even being available for rapid assessment as needed. As Director Clark had said, private industry is normally wanting to act pretty quickly on these. I think a really great example of an urban renewal agency that has conducted some phenomenal work is Lincoln City. And there's countless cities throughout the state that we can look to, but Lincoln City has had their urban renewal agency for 27 years. So they are, of course, ahead of the curve here, but they have done a great job in focusing heavily on public projects for their urban renewal agency, and the amount of accomplishments that they have had with that path is very impressive. And they have been wise to continue to leverage their urban renewal dollars. So I would like to see the city of Grants Pass head in that direction as well, and ensure that all project types outside of housing are required to apply for a loan, because like earlier stated, it would extend the life of the program, and it could continue to leverage those resources for more properties so that we can continue to facilitate projects throughout the city, because we do know that there is a sunset on this agency, and we need to be wise when deciding how to spend these taxpayer dollars.
Brian, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with most of Vanessa's sentiment. With regards to, I've heard a few counselors now say something to the effect of, we need to prove the agency, like eventually, nothing's ever going to happen with this. So I think the agency is obviously going to prove itself over time. I mean, the money's going to be there. Things are going to be done with the money. I see no pressure to, at an early stage, try to prove the agency. I don't understand that. The agency will prove itself as time goes on. That will just naturally come. I would concur that grants for housing developments is a great idea, and that loans for non-housing projects is a great idea as well. As far as the project review committee goes, I have a high level of discomfort with that. As a member of the policy board, I am not interested in ceding any of the board's policy or the board's decision-making authority to a committee or to staff. I don't feel that those decisions are something that staff should be deciding, or a subcommittee. I feel like any funding decision should be the purview of the policy board. Another concern I have is if we start doing some sort of grant process early on, it will pretty strongly dilute the power of the Urban Renewal Agency. If we give out $25,000 grants, that's $1 million right there. So I have a big concern about the power of the Urban Renewal Agency getting diluted early on by having a grant process like this introduced so early into the agency. And I just want to remind the policy board that one of the main purposes of an urban renewal district is to make visible, lasting change and improvements in the community. So I have a concern about small grants potentially nickel and diming the agency to death. Thanks.
All right, I'm not seeing anyone else's hand up. Rick, go ahead.
So Brian, I'd like to respond on that. You have some valid comments there about diluting the agency and the funding, but I guess what I was really referring to is maybe 10% or 5% of the current funds be used to start funding something, not saying 50% or 60%. As you said, if we start eating into the main core of the monies that have been accumulated at this point, then we will put ourselves behind the 8 ball in trying to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you.
All right, so as far as just how to go forward, I guess we have a little bit of a mixed bag here. We have a couple of counselors who have said they're interested in grants for housing, loans for other projects. Joel.
Whoa, okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm interested in just pursuing the budget as we already agreed to. And I think grants are a good thing. I think the private sector can be a great partner, not only in public housing, but in job creation, which also makes for affordable housing because you get higher paying jobs, hopefully. And it has a multiplier effect that helps all the other businesses and families in Grants Pass. I would like to go forward with the guidelines as presented. Before we do that, I'd like to have a sensing meeting with the public, and then I'd like to move forward and stick to our budget. If we see that our budget is being exceeded or not appropriate, then I think we need to change the budget, not have that discussion before anything is allocated. So we need to monitor the budget as we go along. I think that's a very valid point, and that's the role of the board to do that. And I think we need to get started.
Joel, when you say a sensing meeting, are you talking about a meeting specifically about this issue or having it be part of a regular?
So, and I don't have any omnipotent wisdom, Mayor. So I gave that up a long time ago. But the project guidelines that came from the sensing group, there were some folks on the council that felt uncomfortable with that they couldn't attend, or that there were other people that were omitted from that. And so that we would just go with that. What we got from that is a hypothesis, and have a little broader meeting, and then move ahead with our budget as we've already agreed to.
All right, Valerie, and then Vanessa.
I guess I just think that we need to follow through as was presented to us today. I don't think at this point we need to, I personally think that the private sector is more efficient than the public often. And so I don't think it's necessarily our job to say that the private should only get loans as opposed to housing projects, because housing projects also do involve private people. So I think that's too difficult to peg that. I agree kind of with Joel. Let's move forward. We've got a process. Just because something gets recommended, it has to come back to us to make the final decision. I mean, if we have, I liked Vanessa's idea for the group to look through, to get some input and that sort of thing, but nothing should go through without looking over and approval from the council, which is the Urban Renewal Board. So if that helps, but I don't at this point want to differentiate between loan and grant or whatever. I want to follow the guidelines that was put forth by the staff, to just have a process to move forward.
All right, thank you. Vanessa?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to respond to that, Councillor Lovelace, that if a my intention behind my statement is that if a private developer came forward with the intention for a housing development project, you know, the grant would still be a possibility under my direction that I'd like to see this go. It wouldn't necessarily be that, you know, you're cutting out private entities from receiving grants. It would just be that, you know, we're utilizing this tool as the way in which we'd like to see the market go. It's one of the legislative ways that, you know, that governmental bodies can use to steer, you know, ourselves out of the housing crisis. It's one of the many ways that we can, you know, move that forward. And I also wanted to suggest, very similar to the meeting that was held on August 18th, I would be very curious if Director Clark had another meeting with different participants. You know, one, you know, let's just say, for example, the Chamber of Commerce, the Jackson County Housing Authority, So Ready, IVCDO, you know, local credit unions. I'd like to see the direction that would come out of a meeting like that versus the meeting that was held on August 18th, and then we can compare the two results and go from there.
Brian.
Thank you. So, Joel, it's hard for me to understand where you're coming from when, you know, you basically are just, you know, throwing your hands up and saying, you know, staff's done this work, let's just trust staff. I don't understand that. We're the policy board, so we need to be, you know, asking the questions and making the decisions. And when stuff comes to us more or less unsolicited, and you say, you know, let's just follow that, I don't see where the work's being done. And I've heard several other counselors comment on how the private sector is much more effective than government, and in a lot of cases that may be true. But you know, we're in the government, so it's up to us how effective we are. So for us just to throw our hands up and resign the fact that we're not effective, if you're one of the counselors doing that, I would maybe encourage you to go into the private sector. And I'm also looking forward to having a future discussion on the project list in the near future. Thanks.
Valerie, then Joel.
Valerie, you're muted.
Thank you. Housing is one of our biggest issues. So I don't think I am right there behind you, saying whoever comes forth and has some way for us to develop housing. And I think that goes along with what kind of the stakeholder building says. We need flexibility. We need to follow the market. We need to be open to owners, investors, anybody who comes forth, because we don't know what the best deal is going to be. So that's why I really, like I said, we need to remain open. And I just wanted to reiterate to her that I think we all recognize that the housing issue is so very important for all things. And I am also in support of saying, okay, we had this first stakeholder meeting, so let's have a different kind of stakeholder meeting. And I'm not opposed to that at all. I just would like to, I'm happy to see the ball rolling. And I think this gives us a direction. They've kind of given us a direction in terms of, okay, let's have another stakeholder meeting and have different people there and talk about it. But this is at least moving forward in a direction, which I think at this point we really need to do.
Joel, go ahead.
Well, I just need to respond to Brian's statement in an upper brain way. Nobody's throwing up their hands. I think we've had a great discussion that it needs to incorporate all of us and our ideas as we move forward. To say that the experience in the private sector isn't useful for government, or that government experience is not useful in the private sector, is to ignore the synergy that's possible in America. That is not possible in a lot of other countries. And that is a very powerful synergy. So I will choose to, the first word that comes to mind, ignore the statements of people putting words in my mouth that I didn't say. And I say that respectfully, but I need to call that out as well, because that's not appropriate. And my position's the same as what it was before.
Rob.
Thank you. So I really appreciate Vanessa's statement about getting a second group together that kind of has a different, potentially different angle or a different view, which is, and I guess, we're hearing people now saying, we should have a group together that has a little different perspective. We should remain open. And this is exactly the point I was trying to make earlier when I was questioning how this group was selected, because what concerns me is, and I do appreciate there are people who can act more decisively and quickly than I can. And I know that, Valerie is a person of action and she likes moving forward. But we've also heard sometimes her say things like, I've been working on this for X number of years. We need to just get it done. Well, the fact is that how things get started and the direction and the, the trajectory things take in the beginning sometimes becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when I said earlier that I'd wished it had been a little bit more inclusive group, I wish that Aaron had kind of seen to that. I guess we could cover that, so to speak, by saying, let's get another group together that could potentially have a different perspective, so that when we do get started with this, we're not automatically heading down one direction, and that, a few years from now, we're going to be saying, we just need to get this done. Well, we need to have a broad base to start with, broad philosophy to start with. And so I really appreciate, again, Vanessa's suggestion for having a kind of a different perspective at the potentially next go round with this. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any hands up. I'm not sure I have a real clear picture yet of
I think the sniping's easier when you're
where we want to head with this. I have heard, I guess a number of people have mentioned this idea of having another forum or kind of a stakeholders meeting. So maybe that's the next step. I guess, do you guys envision that being a workshop where we invite stakeholders? Oh, I see Aaron with a hand up. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, my suggestion after hearing council's comments is to go ahead and hold a forum, whether it be virtual or in person, depending on how we move forward by the time that date occurs, and not pick and choose, but have a forum and invite anyone who wants to come and have a discussion on that. And that will, I think, accommodate those individuals. And anyone that has expressed an interest in being in the meeting, we'll make sure to do a personal invite. And in the meantime, also, one of the things I'll be doing is I'll be having a discussion with the mayor and council president and looking at developing guidelines for stakeholder engagement. So we have clear expectations on both sides about when and how council and our staff may proceed with gathering stakeholder input.
That sounds really good. And I just saw a little message from Vanessa that she would be interested in attending.
Well, we'll do an invite to everyone. So definitely, if we do hear that the majority of council will be there, we would probably advertise it as such. But yeah, that'd be great. We'll get started on that.
Okay. Rob and then Brian.
Yeah, Aaron, I appreciate your suggestion there. I think it's a good one, and that's the direction I think we should move. Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. And then I would also like to know if now is the appropriate time to bring up the project list, since we requested that 6 months ago, or I'm just curious if now is not the proper time to bring up the project list, when would be a proper time to do that?
So this is Aaron. I would suggest we could have put on the under agenda review. We can have and be better prepared for the project list. That's really not going to take us any time at all. All it would take is for us to do similar to what we're going to do with the LB project list. We'll have a list of the projects and the dollars associated with that, what we already have allocated to those. And if we can put that together within a week or 2 weeks, if council wants to send that as a priority, we apologize for any inconvenience about the concept of trying to come up with recommendations on programs for the LB project versus a project list and the dollars associated with those specific projects. But Councilor Daly-Grange, the actual discussion of the project list and associated the resources, which I think is what you're asking for, would be very simple to put together. We could do that and have it prepared for next week if you'd like. And that may be a better way to do it, because then you'll have something in your hand that has all the numbers associated with the projects and the list and what's been expended to date.
That's great. I'll leave it to Sarah and DJ to handle that.
Just to clarify, because you said next week, Aaron, are you presenting it as a memo, or are you talking about adding this to the workshop?
Well, I was just saying, from a staff perspective, we could get a turnaround time by then. Now, whether or not council wants to put it on the agenda by next week would ultimately, Mayor, be up to you and council to determine. We could, but I think a memo is not going to, from what I'm understanding from Councilor Daly-Grange's request, I don't think a memo is going to really suffice for what the discussion that I envision is, which is really taking a look at the allocation of resources, maybe reprioritizing some of the LB some of the projects within the Urban Renewal Agency. So we can get out that list of the dollars associated with it. It'd almost be like a memo, but I really think it's going to be a workshop discussion, but Councilor Daly-Grange might be able to confirm that or not.
I concur.
All right, thank you. Valerie, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just have a question, and this goes back to the urban renewal and the pool recommendation from the parks, because if it's my understanding, and I don't know actually what the recommendation is at this point in time, but if it is to work with the pool at the current location, do we need to put that back in the urban renewal? Is that something that we will have to do to move forward with that one?
So the pool as an eligible project, I think, is defined in the Urban Renewal Agency, that yes, a pool is an allowable expense, but I think what you're going to also, Councilor Lovelace, is that there would need to be an annexation of property if the pool is to be utilized in the same location as it is currently today. If the Urban Renewal Agency was going to spend dollars on a pool at its current location, there'd need to be a modification of the plan. If the pool was recommended to be somewhere within the current existing Urban Renewal Agency, there would not need to be a modification of the plan.
Yes, that's what I was pertaining to. So would that be part of the discussion that we were to have at the time? Or do we need to wait for the recommendation to come forward?
I don't think the recommendation has fully come forward to council yet from the pool task force. And so having a direction from council on where that goes, that's up to you and the mayor to determine what you'd like to do and how you'd like to, what would come first.
Yeah, we have the pool task force slated for October 11th right now. Joel has his hand up. Maybe he can add more.
You're muted.
Thank you. The committee did not deal with funding at all. They thought that was a council option, whether it would be a bond issued to the citizens or whether it would be urban renewal funds or whether it would be part of the funds that we got for COVID. They thought that would be a council level decision. So there's not going to be any input from the committee on the funding of the pool from the committee. That'll be up to the council.
All right. So at this point, it just sounds like we're going to go forward with that stakeholders forum. It's a little bit of a mixed bag, I guess, right now on what I was hearing regarding whether we should continue with developing the grant guidelines. But I guess for the time being, we'll move forward with that. It sounds like maybe more interest in moving forward with it than not moving forward, depending on how the timing lines up. Joel, is your hand up again or still? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Joel.
I said I would like to move forward, and I wouldn't view it as throwing my hands up in the air and blindly trusting staff. I think it's an upper brain decision that, based on the requests that we've had in council priorities under strategic planning, that could have been done had we had a process that we're missing. We're missing opportunities.
All right, thank you. All righty. Next up on our agenda, city annexations.
Thank you, Mayor. This is Brad again, and I'm going to pull up the service and annexation agreement annexations here. Okay. So this conversation, hopefully we got this one right, or a little closer to what the expectations were. I think there's kind of two-pronged topic here today. One is the overview of state and local annexation rules. This is more kind of on a macro level. And then secondly, reviewing our service and annexation agreements to determine next steps for those particular properties. So the annexation is the overall topic, and then kind of broken into those two areas. This relates to your goal to facilitate sustainable and manageable growth in the city. So here's what we have for an agenda. Reviewing the annexation law, highlighting that, talking about what our city charter states, service and annexation agreements in more detail, types of city and owner initiated annexations, and then some alternatives for next steps on annexation in general. So just so you know where this information is pulled from, the League of Oregon Cities produces a manual that they update on a frequent basis. This manual was updated last September, I believe, 2020. It's called the Oregon Municipal Handbook. And they have summarized in there a lot of information. I just kind of distilled it here. So annexation in Oregon is regulated under ORS 222, and there are really that legislation controls annexation procedures and the type of territory that can be annexed. And there really are two fundamental requirements that go through the legislation. The properties have to be contiguous to the existing city limits in order to be annexed. There's a lot of legislation on that. What does contiguous mean? Is it a shoestring or otherwise? But that is a requirement. And then it has to be, there's a test of reasonableness. Is it reasonable to annex it in? Annexation can be initiated either through petition by residents, application by residents, or a motion of the city council. Landowners can voluntarily consent to annexation. So this is the service and annexation, what the city of Grants Pass calls service and annexation agreements. It's essentially a contract, and if, for example, someone's septic goes bad, they're not in the city, and they want to hook up to the city sewer, they can enter into this agreement that allows for the city to extend that sewer, even though they're not in the city limits. Similarly with water, we have the same thing with public safety. An election on annexation is not required under 6 different conditions unless a city charter requires otherwise. So that's an important piece. And here's what our charter currently says. Chapter 1, Section 3. The city of Grants Pass shall include all territory encompassed by its boundaries as they now exist or as modified as provided herein, unless mandated by state law. All annexations by whatever means to the city of Grants Pass must be approved by a majority vote of the electors of the city. So there's language in several different subsections of Oregon Revised Statute that points to if you have a charter and it says that you need to have an election before you annex property, that is what you need. So Mark and or Aaron can maybe shed more light on the city's history on that. The city's charter would need to be amended to annex properties without holding a citywide election, unless we have this written consent to annexation, which we have over 200 properties that the city has contracts with, which states clearly that they have already agreed to annexation. So those, again, that's the 2 different properties that we're talking about today. One are those properties where somebody does not have an agreement with the city already, and then there's those properties that would be in the future asking to be annexed or asking for city services. So here is the specific provision out of the Oregon Revised Statute 222.127, and the highlighted section refers to notwithstanding a contrary provision of the city charter or city ordinance, upon receipt of a petition proposing annexation of territory submitted by all owners of land in the territory, the legislative body of the city shall annex without submitting the proposal to the electors of the city. So that particular provision was appealed to the Oregon Supreme Court several years ago and was upheld about a year ago. So this, the upshot of this is that the city charter language that mandates an election prior to annexation is really not enforceable. And again, Mark has been following this legislation. Can shed any light at the council once more on that piece. So going into these agreements that we have, as I already mentioned, we have the authority under Oregon statute to be entering into these agreements. The legislation has just those 3 requirements. It has to be signed by the owner, has to be recorded with Josephine County, and then when recorded, it is binding on successors. So if one property owner came in 10 years ago and they said, yeah, I want this sewer service or this water service, they entered into this agreement. Even if the property's changed hands 3 or 4 times since then, it's still legitimate consent to annex. We also have an intergovernmental agreement between the city and Josephine County that allows for these agreements. The development code talks about it, and then we also have a city policy number 10-1, which sets the minimum requirements and a whole suite of things related to how service and annexation agreements should be managed. So getting to how many we have, where they are, that's what the next few slides are going to focus on. So we have 96 active service and annexation agreements that affects 258 different properties. You may wonder why that is. That's typically it's when a developer of a subdivision comes in, and Capitol Hills off of G Street is a good example of this, where they wanted city service but did not annex. So the developer at the time of subdividing the land signed the agreement, and that after subdivision took place, that single agreement affected multiple properties in the subdivision. 887.7 acres, but the majority of that, as you see in the last bullet, is actually the Merlin area, the landfill, and the North Valley Industrial Park. That by itself is just 745 acres. So that's in terms of the acreage that we're talking about. Of those 258 individual properties that we have contracts with, 186 receive public safety services. So that leaves 72 properties that are water sewer services only, that are not getting public safety. 25 properties are water sewer service only in Merlin, resulting in 47 properties to get public safety service. So that's maybe a confusing way to get to the numbers, but wanted to show you how we got there. So this is a snapshot of what's in those service annexation agreements that we have signed by all those 200 and some odd properties. And the underlined section says they grant continuing irrevocable consent to annex the property. And the second underlined section there, the owner hereby requests and grants continuing irrevocable consent for inclusion of the property in the UGB. And the Oregon Revised Statute refers to a year or as otherwise agreed to, and the city has had this practice of having the owner sign the waiver of annexation limitation at the same time that the contract is entered into. And so that's what this language is. Basically, it's giving the city more than 1 year to exercise its right to annex. So I'll just kind of quickly go through these next few slides. It just kind of shows you graphically where these service annexation agreements are located. You can see the Merlin area and the 700 plus acres out there related to the landfill and the industrial park. Up in the north, we just have 2 parcels that we have current agreements with. Here in the southwest area, the Kingsley Drive is one of our long-standing ones. The Rogley off Rogley Lane, and there's several others there. Here's in another part of the southwest off of Upper River Road. This is the Capitol Hill subdivision that I mentioned, along with a couple of other parcels that are adjacent to Capitol Hills. And then there's quite a few here in the southeast area off of Rogue River Highway and Fruitdale Drive. And then further south, off of Williams Highway, we have a couple of parcels, and then kind of down near the golf course. And this map was prepared by the public safety staff, and looks at where those properties that I mentioned earlier that do not have police service in their agreements. There's 47 properties. Quite a focus over here in the southeast in the Fruitdale area, and then there's a handful of them on the very south end off Grants Pass, and then up off of Upper River Road, Lower River Road. So again, those are the properties where if annexation was to occur, that would increase service, that would change how public safety is provided to these properties. So annexation process and steps. So again, this is just for those properties that I was just speaking about, the SNA agreement properties. So we can assess the pros and cons of full versus a partial approach. So while the authority is there for the city to go ahead and bring all of them in, we could focus on just parcel clusters and subdivisions. We could bring them all in at once. We needed to look at the impacts of annexation on public works, on public safety, determining the cost and time. We need to do legal descriptions. The state requires, a legal description for that annexation before they are formally annexed. We also need to look at some of those agreements have unique conditions of approval. We would want to go through each one and look at those and make sure that they either are met or can easily be met before annexing them. There's property owner notification, I think, is important, even though we have these agreements. You know, as I said earlier, some of these property owners probably don't even know, even though in the title search it would have come up. But I think a property owner notification is always a good thing. We need to prepare the actual annexation application itself, and there is a public hearing before the city council. So that's kind of what we're looking at if the council today chose to give direction to proceed ahead with those properties. I do want to go back to that map with the public safety that in some cases could change service, and the chief can talk about that if the council wants to hear what would be the impacts. This would not include at this point the community college. That would not. That's not part of the list that I showed earlier. Although it's possible that in the future there will be a service annexation agreement with RCC. So moving on to the second to last item on the agenda, this is the city and owner initiated annexations. So separate from those contract annexations that we just discussed, there are really 6 main ways. There's others. I forget how many, maybe another 5 or 6 others, but the 6 main ones are these listed here. And we wanted to make sure that the council was aware of what the statute says for this type of annexation. So the first one, by consent of landowners and electors, this is where all owners proposed for annexation and at least 50% of the electors in the territory consent in writing. And again, all 5 of these, there would not need to be a vote under the state statute, but because the charter says there has to be a vote, we would need to do that. So, and when we use the word territory, that's basically, it could be 1 lot, it could be 10 lots, it could be 100. It just depends on the application and the developer and what the specific goal is of that particular annexation. So that's a broad term in the code. Second, by consent of electors in the territory. So the city can annex territory if at least 50% of electors in the territory approve. So if you only have 1 property, there's typically just going to be 1 elector there that would be met. And then there's a funky one called the double majority of landowners and electors. So in this case, if you have a majority of electors and owners of more than 50% of the land. So again, this is the territories. Let's say the territory is 10 acres. If you have 5.1 acres of those 10 acres, the owners of that land, if they consent, then they can file a statement with the city saying, yeah, we consent to annexation. So you would have to have a majority of electors and more than 50% of the land owners, or 50% of the land acreage. Number 4, this is a double majority of city and territory voters. And believe me, these are very complicated. It gets messy quick if you read the ORS. So we tried to distill it down as much as possible for today's conversation. So this one, the city can annex territory by approval of more than 50% of city voters and 50% of voters in the territory.
What's the difference between
Number 5, this one adds in a 3rd piece, and that's the assessed value, which is not a part of the other prior 4 methods. And under this triple majority, the city can annex if you have more than 50% of property owners who own more than 50% of the land area, which also constitutes more than 50% of the assessed value of the territory.
Oh my gosh.
So you have to start with getting the total assessed value of whatever land is being annexed. And then you have to have at least 50% of that value being owned by people who also agree to the annexation. And 6, there's the island annexations. This one talks about property that is surrounded by the corporate boundaries of the city or by the corporate boundaries and a river or creek or Interstate 5. This gets very unique geographic constraints around this particular type of annexation. So what do we do moving ahead? One option, we could amend the city charter to remove election requirement for annexations. That would make us consistent with that Supreme Court ruling from last year. We can shift development practice away from SNA agreements and require annexation at the time of urbanized development. At this point, I should say that from my understanding, and Aaron can speak probably more eloquently to this than myself since I've only been here a while, 2 years, but I think we're very unique in the state of Oregon in terms of our current practice. The majority of communities, including Medford and others in the Rogue Valley, just require that annexation right up front. You wouldn't even start the conversation about providing sewer and water and stormwater and police services until you actually annex. There's some benefits to that. It reduces the time in our finance department. They currently have to do an annual billing to those people with those service annexation agreements. If they're just annexed, they don't have to do that billing. It would allow for resident participation in city elections. Right now, for all of those residents in the service annexation area with those agreements, they do not vote for city council or mayor. And it's a cleaner approach from Josephine County assessor and finance to not have this extra layer of these agreements. So there's many cost implications. I just put a couple of high level ones here. For the property owners, the big difference is really that between the Josephine County property tax rate and the city of Grants Pass property tax rate. When annexed, obviously that changes and they go to the city of Grants Pass rate. In terms of the cost of the sewer and the water, they are paying for that service right now, but the property tax is not. They're still paying Josephine County rates. And then for the city, for those 47 parcels that do not have public safety services, there would be an increased cost to provide police and fire protection there. We also have to pay the Josephine County assessor a fee when we annex property. They have a mapping process, so there's a couple of fees involved there. And then there's quite a bit of analysis, of course, to go through the annexations that I mentioned earlier. No call to action, it's at council's discretion. And then we could move this to another workshop. You could direct us to proceed with partial annexation of selected properties with those service annexation agreements. You could direct us to proceed with the full annexation of all those properties with SNA agreements, because both of those can be done. The last part of the presentation was just those annexations without contracts. And to my knowledge, we don't have any pending action or anything necessary to talk about there, unless we're going to change the policy approach to just require annexation. So I guess that could be a fourth alternative that's not up there.
Thank you, Brad. Mark, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, so Brad touched on ORS 222-127, and so that trumps local charter requirements. In fact, the statute specifically even references, it says, notwithstanding contrary provisions of a city charter or city ordinance. Our charter requires a vote of the electors for all annexations, This requirement 222-127 basically overrides our charter in that regard when it is an annexation petition in certain limited context. So Brad outlined all the various annexation scenarios. So this is not all encompassing with regard to this statute, but when it is a petition by unanimous petition by all the landowners in the affected territory, and it's contiguous, at least one parcel of that territory is currently contiguous with existing city limits, then no vote is required. So I just wanted to make that a little bit more clear, hopefully.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Council, what questions do you have? Rick, go ahead.
Thank you, Brad. You already touched on what level of services would be required with the annexation. I realize if a developer comes in and they want to sign the agreement, they've agreed to certain things, but before that can actually be accepted, can you elaborate a little bit further, especially sewer, water, street standards, stormwater, curb, gutter, and sidewalks? Don't those all have to be in place before that property can be accepted, or is there some wiggle room there?
Well, if a developer comes in with a subdivision application and concurrent with their subdivision application, they file an annexation application. My understanding is that we would require all of the improvements that are required for that subdivision to be made at the time. So we would proceed with the annexation prior to them having all of those subdivision improvements installed, but they wouldn't be able to get their final subdivision recorded until we go through the typical engineering checks and all of the other things that go with the improvement, the entitlement. So is that what you were asking?
Yes, but maybe a better example, you were pointing out in the Cloverlawn area, there's about 10 or more properties that had individual annexation agreements. And let's say 3 of those properties are contiguous with each other and want to come in individually. They want to come in, then would all the improvements have to be in place before they could actually be taken within?
I don't know if Jason is on, he could maybe talk about that. I don't think that the current agreement, we'd have to look at the agreement. Some of those were signed many years ago. There's been a couple of modifications to the agreement. I don't think that most of them require the curb, gutter, sidewalk, and other improvements to be done before we would go and annex them. Especially if they're not proposing any changes right now. If it's just a single family house, they're getting sewer and water, for example, but they don't have curb, gutter, and sidewalk. I don't believe the majority of those contracts require them to put that in. Now, I would have to go and confirm that.
Okay, thank you.
Vanessa, then Valerie. Oh, hang on, Vanessa. Let's have Aaron. Did you have something to jump in real quick?
Well, I was just going to continue on what Brad was talking about and answering Councilor Reicher's question. So in order to help make sure efficient development occurs and we don't get a patchwork of, on this street, halfway down the block, we have someone who had to put in a sidewalk, and then the rest of it is unapproved, no curb, gutter, and sidewalk. We would, in some of those SNAs, the SNAs state that at any time the city can initiate the annexation for those properties. But if there is development that needs to occur, it could be that that's where, for instance, a deferred development agreement may exist, to where they'd have to pay into, okay, the street will ultimately be upgraded, you're going to be responsible. You have to agree to the deferred development agreement as a item for you. And then to answer another question, I think you asked also, Councilor Riker, is with those annexations, those property initiated annexations, and if the services aren't there, et cetera, that's where we start to play into more of a reimbursement district that's associated with that. When a developer will have to put in the infrastructure annex, but maybe some of the neighbors haven't annexed yet, that's where deferred development agreements become more popular when you have that type of annexation.
All right, thank you. Vanessa, then Valerie.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that presentation, Brad. My question is, I'm looking for some clarity around the history of today's discussion. I'm not clear on the path on how this came to council today, I suppose.
This might be a time for me to jump in.
I wasn't sure if it had, I thought you had mentioned it once, Val, but yes, please go ahead.
I'll say I asked for it because we have a citizen asking about the annexation process, somebody who's in one of these agreements, and so it seemed like a good time for just those of us who are new to get some background on the issue and figure out where things stand. And you can go, Valerie.
I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually had somebody, and in the annexation, people who have service agreements who are not annexed do not vote. Am I correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And so I think that's where it came to my, I had a person say, I'm receiving police services, water, and whatever, but I do not have the right to vote. And so that was what brought this forward, and my question became, well, when can they vote? And so it was my understanding that they don't vote until they're annexed. And another thing that came up is if a service agreement is basically an agreement to receive water and sewer or police services, am I correct? So they are paying only for those service agreements. They are not paying city taxes, am I correct?
That is correct.
So that's why I feel like I've kind of opened a can of worms, actually. And I so appreciate this explanation because it does answer a lot of my questions is when you start seeing this and we talk about, well, I'm starting to hear people say, well, we need more buildable land. Well, in order to get more buildable land, you have to increase your urban growth boundary. And then we've heard about from our consultant, well, we don't really need to increase the amount of land that we have because we have plenty of land in our urban growth district. And so that kind of brought me back down to, okay, well, we have some of these places that are being developed, but they're not paying taxes. So they're not paying for all of this. They are paying, and I don't know if a service agreement is less. I mean, they're paying for the services, but they're not really in our taxing district, so we're not getting the taxing money from it. So it just kind of, like I said, opens this whole can of worms about, okay, who receives public services, who doesn't receive public services, who receives water, who doesn't receive water, who has the right to vote, who doesn't have the right to vote. And to me, it just seems really convoluted the way it is now. I think in a way, from what I'm seeing, if we were to just open it up and annex everybody, we'd have, crisis. I mean, people having to suddenly go from $1.59 or whatever it is in county taxes to $5 in some, you're going to have a revolution. So I can't really see that, but I do really see the need with these service whatever they're agreements, to be brought forward and to let people know why they can't vote. Because a lot of people are in the city, they think they can vote, then they get their ballot and they can't vote and they don't know why. So there's a whole lot of public education, I think, that needs to take place here. And that's basically what I see as needing to happen. And I also acknowledge and realize that we may not have the services or the capacity to take on all that urban growth boundary. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think here we have a situation where some citizens may want to annex. And so I guess we need to understand what the process is and whether they have that option. because there has been a change. I think if I understand this correctly, where state law has changed and it's kind of superseding what was in our charter, which previously required the entire city to take a vote. So I guess that's what we're trying to get at here, is to get us all up to speed, but not to try to force annexation necessarily on anybody, but we have had some inquiries from people who are interested in being annexed, and so we need to understand what process it takes to get them there. Do you have other questions, Vanessa?
I do not at this time. Thank you. I really appreciate that explanation.
Okay, thanks. And Valerie, are you done? You can just nod.
I'm just going to compliment you because you did a good job of putting it forth that we have had interest in people knowing how to go about a process. Once again, having a process in place is important, and having the people who are interested know what that process is. So thank you, Sarah.
I see Rick's hand was up and then it went back down. Oh, it's back. Go ahead, Rick.
Sorry.
Did you have a question, Rick?
No, I don't. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, okay, it was a misfire. But you figured out how to raise your hand, so good job. All right, does anybody else have any questions? I guess I have just a question for staff because of the way that the law has changed. Do we need to do anything on this to just kind of get our process caught up with where state law is at, or can we just leave things as they are for now?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that. So, as I mentioned, that element of state law that trumps our charter requirement for voting is limited to a certain annexation scenario that would not necessarily be implicated in all potential annexation situations, depending on the contiguity or of the territory, which is the land proposed to be annexed, depending on the ownership makeup, etc. So that would not cover everything. It's certainly helpful. And the charter does say, unless otherwise directed by state law. So with regard to that situation, it doesn't need to change. That said, every time we've opened up the hood and gone in and looked at the charter, I've always advocated for getting rid of the vote of the electors requirement in the past. And I do think that it unduly burdens our ability to free up buildable land inventory.
Thank you. All right, so it sounds like we don't need to do anything with this unless council wants to pursue making a change. Oh, Valerie, you have a hand?
I just have a question for Mark, because that was totally confusing, and so I just kind of want to clarify what he said. So it's my understanding that you're saying, Mark, that if say it's just the consent of the landowners and electors, all owners, number one, all owners propose for annexation at least 50% of the electors. Let's say we have some people that are contiguous, so that we've got a land development that was developed by a developer, and the people on board want to get along so they can vote, and they put in writing that they want to be annexed. Then you're saying that those people can right now. Is that clarified? Is that clear? So in other words,
I'll restate. Here's the only. I'm going to tell the council. Here's the only situation in which state law trumps our vote requirement for annexation. So you need a couple of elements to be present. You would have to have a petition proposing annexation submitted by all owners of the land in the territory. Mm-hmm. Then you have to have the territory has to be in the urban growth boundary, which I don't even know why the statute wrote that, because you cannot annex land outside the UGB anyway. Then the territory is or will be subject to the comp plan. That's correct. And then you have to have at least one lot or parcel within the territory that is contiguous to city limits. So not all the parcels have to be. You just have to have one that's contiguous. Okay. So if all those elements are present, then we don't need a vote. Other situations, outlined by Brad, where it's, 50%, the, double majority of this and that all requires a vote
Okay.
still.
So okay, thank you. That helps me, because if I do have somebody who is under those, what you just said is possible, then we could at least give them a process by which they could go about annexing themselves in. Otherwise, your recommendation is that correct? I mean, I'm just saying if this one person in particular, if we looked up all of that and they were able to get that by all the owners of the property, and they were lined up to the current city boundaries, then we could say, yes, here's a process by which you could become annexed in without having to go to a public vote.
That's correct. And the territory could consist even just of one parcel. So if one parcel in the UGB, one landowner wants to get in and get annexed, as long as they're contiguous, they petition for it, obviously they're consenting to it, then that one property comprises the whole territory. That could proceed without a vote.
Okay, great, thank you. And then your second part of that is that you were saying that you don't think that this public vote, that it should be taken out of the charter. But in order to do that, we would have to go out to a public vote on amending the charter. Am I correct?
Take a charter. Right, yep.
Okay, just one clarification, thank you.
All right, thanks for that. So yeah, if anybody's watching, I assume they would contact your office, Brad, if they were interested in annexing. Is that where the process would begin?
Yeah, that's correct. We do have an application, and they would provide their legal description, and then, go through the steps of having that application filled out, and then we would set a public hearing before the city council.
Thank you. All right.
I have one more question. And this goes back to when they were talking about the subdivision. Like you're talking about the subdivision out, I don't know, Capitol Hills, I think it was called, and the developer is the one who signs the agreement for all the people in that particular subdivision, correct? And so does that mean that when this subdivision is approved, that the individual people do not have to sign, but they all have been given service agreements? Am I correct?
Yep.
But they still are only paying county taxes. They are not paying city taxes. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, so they still don't have the opportunity to vote because they haven't been annexed in, but they are receiving, in this case, probably all water, sewer, and police services. Am I correct?
Right.
So how much does a service agreement like that cost? Is it comparable to paying city taxes, or is it less than paying city taxes? I mean, I'm just kind of trying to figure out the financial difference between just having a service agreement as opposed to paying property taxes.
So their water and sewer is going to be exactly, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's going to be exactly what they would pay. They're paying that bill. It just happens to be that they're paying it in a different manner, but I think they're still paying it. Now the public safety, is a little tougher to sort of get a figure on, because it's not like there's a meter that we can look at and charge them. But they're getting that, they're still getting the benefit of that fire service, of that police service through that. Now there is not there's a specific ratio that our finance department uses to come up with that amount, and we can get that. If you're interested, we can get that out to the council in a memo form, exactly, how that piece is.
Does that mean that they do not pay for the levy? The police and fire levy that we pay the $1.79, does that mean that they do not pay that?
You know what, rather than having you give that information, let's just get a memo on
Yes, I would like that.
There. That way we can make sure that we get it all straight.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's just the type of information I'd like, but thank you.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Sure.
That would be useful for the person I spoke to as well, to know exactly what they're paying for and what might cost extra if they were to annex. And I think Jason had his hand up but put it down, so I think he's just going to jump on to that memo as well. All right, any other questions about this topic? this isn't something we need to pursue unless anybody wants to bring it back up just during another agenda review. We can add it to another meeting. All right, next up, remote council workshops and meetings. And so we don't have a staff presentation on this. It's just a council discussion, but obviously we are meeting from home or remotely for the time being, and council requested to have a discussion about this and how long we're going to be doing it. So, you know, at the time that DJ and I spoke and we made the decision to go home, we did not discuss a metric for when we would come back. I think that we can remain flexible on that, or if you wanted to establish some sort of benchmark, we could do that as well. But did councilors want to talk about this issue? Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I'm not at all clear why this decision was made to be remote at this time. It would seem to me that a month ago, when we were on the, we'll say the bottom of the major upswell of the case numbers, when the doctors came in and talked to us, that may have been a time for the council to discuss and vote to meet remotely. To suddenly and without any discussion, after we've come down or begin to come down the mountain on that upswell, to suddenly and without discussion decide to meet remotely, I don't see any logic there, none whatsoever. I wasn't part of that discussion. No one asked me for my opinion. But again, if a month ago I could actually see an intelligent discussion ensuing about that, but as it's already started to come down, I don't see the point. I don't understand how it was decided, why it was decided, and then I'll also say that while I understand that, quite frankly, probably the mayor more than anyone else has a lot more work to do during a virtual meeting, and I feel that Sarah, you did a very good job at the last meeting. Nonetheless, me personally, I feel that I'm about 1/3 down on the information that gets exchanged, my understanding of that information, my understanding of different counselors' perspective. You know, there may be people who work for Google or Facebook who can do a great job meeting daily, multiple times a day, and they're just wonderful at really getting the full meaning out of meetings. I'm not one of those people, so for me, I feel that I'm about a 1/3 disadvantage as far as really understanding and getting a good sense of everyone in the room and what's going on. So I'm very much against having virtual meetings unless they're really, really necessary. And I think that months ago we had a deal where we decided, or maybe state law or state mandate, or I know Marcus said it's not law, the mandate, but state suggestion made it so that we met and we had every other seat was empty. We had masks on. We had a maximum of 25 in the room. To me, that's a middle ground that should have been explored before going virtual this time. Again, no explanation given, no explanation understood for why we did it, and I think there was a middle ground that we could have potentially taken had we decided that we needed to take action. Thank you.
Rick, and then Valerie.
I'm also in favor of relooking at going on in-person meetings. I guess I would like to see the potential of next Monday being in person with masks.
Sorry, Rick, I accidentally muted you when I was trying to put down your hand.
Okay, sorry. So I'm in favor of possibly meeting next Monday with masks, and depending on where the COVID level is, whether we're distanced or not distanced would be on that level. So while I acknowledge we weren't consulted for the initial change, I do feel with the peak that we did have, it was probably appropriate. But now I'm also seeing, as the medical people also advised or indicated, the peak would be the first part of September, and that did occur. And now we're seeing a decrease, so I would be in favor of meeting again here soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about muting you. Valerie, then Vanessa.
Yes, I would prefer to go. I would have liked to have seen that middle step taken. I mean, that's kind of what I expected. I kept coming in expecting to see us going back to the every other chair and masking before going completely to online meetings. So I think there is a spectrum, and I think that I would like to see us go back to open meetings, and if it does rise, first do the in-between state, because as Rob described, and I agree, I guess I use a lot of mannerisms and when I talk to people and like to look at them and feel those other, whatever. And I also really think it's important that we open up to the public, and I don't feel as open to the public in a virtual meeting. So I would like to see us open back up.
Vanessa.
Yes, thank you. I would like to preface by saying I fully support the mayor and the council president in the decision that they've made to move our meetings virtually. I don't believe any consultation was needed from the council when it's a consideration of safety to the council and to the public at large. So I do support that move, and I have no aversion to remaining virtual for as long as it's deemed necessary for the safety of the council and the community. Of course, it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. Of course, we could have moved these meetings virtually during our peak when we did hear from the doctors, but that's the past and we're now in the present. So I think also in anticipation of House Bill 2560 that does come into effect January 1st of 2022, this is a great way for us to get, kind of the ball rolling on remote meetings. I know that that is a hybrid approach, so at that time, hopefully we'll be back in person, but hybrid meetings are coming to the Grants Pass City Council, so I would encourage all council members to become well-versed in virtual meetings. It is a way of the future, and I think it does open up participation to the community as a whole, because now people who would like to comment during public hearings or during public comment, they don't have to find a babysitter, they don't have to get their shift covered. It actually opens up participation to the community, I do believe. And I would like to also just kind of run down the list. I did some research on local city councils, and the Medford City Council is meeting in person, but the meetings are closed to the public. They are having the public either send in written or emailed comments. Talent is meeting virtually. Ashland is meeting virtually. Klamath Falls is meeting remote and in person. Roseburg, their meetings are on Zoom. The city council for Brookings is in person, and Coos Bay is in person. So you can see that a majority of them are meeting virtually at this time along with us. Thank you.
Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I support the mayor and the council president's decision. It's a moving target, and we're doing the best we can. And I think that the mayor and the council president are doing the best they can, and I think that their decision is totally fine, warranted the circumstances. That said, well, actually, I would also add it was extremely wise of them to do that, because if they hadn't done that, I would have been in that meeting with you all last Monday, and that was the first day I was showing COVID symptoms. So good job, Mayor, for saving the rest of council on that one. But that's beside the point. But I think going forward now, if we can, go back to the structure we had before, where we were all spaced out, we were all wearing masks staff was in the audience, and we had a very limited amount of seats for the public. That meets the guidelines, that meets the safety protocols. It meets what some of the counselors want to see. And I think if we can all abide by that, I would be in favor of going back to that. Thanks.
All right, we haven't heard from you, Kurt.
All right. Well, I would agree completely that I'm in support of the decision that was made to go remote. I will say that I struggle with the same things that Rob does being remote, but I have no problem with the fact that we did it, and I agree that it's something we're going to have to be able to do in the future. I do agree that if we go back to the spaced out mask wearing meetings, I'm okay with that too. So I don't have any other pearls of wisdom to add today.
All right, thank you. Well, it sounds like the majority preference is to return to our in-person meetings with the social distancing. So, Valerie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, and I think that is great. But it is kind of nice to have a metric. I mean, for each kind of I know there's no perfection or whatever, but I'm not opposed to guys have making that decision. But, in retrospect, we probably should have made that right shortly after we were getting the scream from our hospital people saying, hey, we are at rise, we are in an imminent danger. That's when I get, oh yeah, shut the doors, let's do it. So it would be nice to have some sort of metric by which we do go to that place, because if, like I said, I would have, that in retrospect, that's when we should have been shut down. So anyway, just my thoughts. If some sort of metric is a possibility, that would be great.
Well, I would agree that the decision came later than it should, but I guess as Vanessa said, there's no need to continue, making the wrong decision, I guess. At this point, our numbers are still very, very high. I'll just, point out to you all that they are coming down off that peak, but they are many times worse than they were last year. We've had some people who would have been in that room last week who have been affected by COVID recently. I know now many people who, have had it, are having it. So Monday seems fast, but that's, I guess Valerie's the only person who really mentioned trying to come up with some sort of metric, which I would really support personally, waiting until we are back down to, an August 1st level or something like that. We're still in a situation where we have the National Guard here and our hospital is absolutely full of COVID patients. So rather than just pick Monday, it would be great if we agreed upon a metric, but if everybody wants to go back to open meetings, then that's what we'll do. Valerie, is your hand up again, or I'm not sure if I didn't take it down. Maybe Kurt?
Yeah, why don't we let the Asante people give us some guidance on a metric, rather than coming up with an arbitrary metric of our own.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Joel, we didn't hear from you yet. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's
Go ahead,
okay,
Joel.
Mayor. That's okay. So, when we open back up, we can't forget that we still have the option of calling in remotely. So people have that option, and people still have the option of emailing us for public comment, and even writing a letter, for heaven's sakes. So there's other ways of participating, and that will still be available to those that don't want to meet face to face at that time, even with that metric being met. And I think that's important to respect that individual choice as we move forward, and that mutual respect eliminates bimodal populations. So, and it's nice to have a one normal curve rather than two bimodal populations. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'll point out we do have staff and myself who don't get to have a choice in participating remotely necessarily. So, but that is an option for council, and obviously the public has ways that they can get a hold of us outside of those meeting times. Vanessa, go ahead.
I wanted to second Councilor Collins' statement about consulting with medical professionals. I think that's wise, and maybe talking to Josephine County Public Health with some assistance of creating a metric.
All right. I guess would you like to make a motion? I mean, it's tricky I can't even see heads nodding today, you know, so you're going to have to either take a formal vote.
Or give you thumbs up.
I see Brian's hand up.
Oh, well, I would just move that we seek guidance from Asante for metrics for a safe meeting in person.
Second by Vanessa.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to call on you because I can't see y'all. I can see Kurt.
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay. And Rick?
Yes, I don't have a problem with that, but I guess I would like to see metrics when, if it's possible to meet Monday or what level we would be comfortable with. I mean, I realize the medical profession can have, I want to say an extreme, but maybe more cautious than I feel is necessary. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't have caution, because even when we're going through this before, I kept saying, are we going back to distancing? Are we going back to masks? And that was before we did. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Let's see. We heard from Brian. How about Valerie?
Well, I agree that the guidance would be wide. I'd like to get their guidance, and then even if that meant Monday, we went remotely before we had a decision on Wednesday night's meeting, get the information from them for their guidance and then make that decision.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, I'd actually like to go back to meeting live, and we could let Asante take whatever time they need to come up with any metrics. They may or may not have any actual experience with what we're asking them to provide. They could be in their own sense winging it as anyone else is. Even when things were on the rise, Asante came to our meeting masked and obviously felt comfortable enough to do it. So as far as them coming up with a policy for a public body of how a public body should behave and the issues that we're involved with, I don't know that they would have any more experience than anyone else. Matter of fact, I don't see how they could, quite frankly, because they've never been in our position. So I would rather meet in person, and if Asante would like to weigh in or like to take whatever time is necessary for them to weigh in, I'd be interested in hearing it for the future, but I would like to go back to meeting live, and if we feel the need to distance more in the room, I can certainly understand that. But I would definitely like to go back to meeting live. I just think the quality of the information exchange is far better, and I think that we would end up doing a better job. Thank you.
And Joel?
I'm going to say no. The reason I'm going to say no is not that their opinion is not valued, but I think we as leaders need to take responsibility and not put it on Asante for our public meetings. And we need to make that decision. Whether it's us being comfortable with where Sarah's at or whatever, but we need to be responsible for that and not let Asante be responsible for that. And I think as leaders, I always feel that accountability and that responsibility is important, and that we don't give that decision making to another private industry or a nonprofit or something like that. We maintain that in the public sphere.
Okay, well, right now I'm counting 4 of
Mayor?
you. Hang on.
This is Vanessa. I
Yeah.
didn't get asked yet to vote.
Oh, okay, sorry. Go ahead, Vanessa.
That's okay. I vote yes on the motion. And I have heard a couple counselors insinuate that the expertise of medical professionals isn't worthy of, providing an opinion on a metric for us meeting back in person. And I think that really plays into the dangerousness of the parallel pandemic that we're facing of misinformation and distrust in healthcare industry. So I would like to caution anyone against downplaying the folks who presented to us with public health degrees. They've spent many years of their lives studying just what we are experiencing today. So I would absolutely support receiving guidance, which is what it is. It is guidance. It is not a policy decision. It is guidance from medical professionals on a metric for us meeting again in person.
All right, I have 4 in support of the motion and 3 against, but I'm also seeing a number of hands up. Kurt, you're first.
I just wanted to say that, the whole reason we do any of these actions is really, we are accepting that people are going to be responsible for themselves. And when they aren't responsible, who sees the real problem? It's the hospital. We don't have a visibility on the pandemic, any one of us, but the people at the hospital absolutely have a visibility on what's going on. So they would be the people that could give us a metric to say whether things are getting worse or whether they're getting better. And by setting a milestone that if we get below a certain case number, or there's a certain number of ICU beds available, then we know that we're going in the right direction, and we as council should be modeling proper behavior.
Valerie.
That was cool.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on this too, because I also don't think it's necessarily their business to, they may not feel comfortable giving us a metric either. Exactly. I feel most comfortable going back to the separation that we had and getting a metric on when to shut her down, I guess is what I'm saying, is because I do feel more comfortable. And I think, like was mentioned, if you're not feeling well, you call in. If, I think that's something that we've all said. If, personally, I'm vaccinated, and so wearing a mask and being separated 6 feet to me is fine. And so I feel that it is my responsibility as a leader to do that and to also continue meeting in public, which I think it does make it easier for the public to see what we're doing and see and watch us, even if it's them just watching in person, seeing us all there in person. So I would still go for the metric, but I'm not sure that I want to sit around and wait for them, because I think they have enough on their plate without having to come up with something for us. So we are responsible adults, and we are supposed to be leaders. So I'm willing to step forward and go with the social distancing, the masking, and then getting that metric on when they feel we need to go virtual.
All right, so you've just changed?
Yes, I have. Sorry.
All right, Rick. Joel is first, then Rick.
So I don't think anybody intends to say that the medical community is not worth its beans, because it certainly is. And to say otherwise does a disservice to them. And I think all of us would agree on that. One of the things that I've noticed is we tend to be reactive rather than proactive. And so rather than a metric, I would look at a trend. Having done a lot of monitoring in biological things, the trend is more important than the exact metric. So when you're trending up versus trending down, That allows you to get ahead of the curve rather than be behind it all the time. So just something to think about.
Just shoot me a quick note.
Well, I guess in that sense, you could say that waiting until our hospital gets back to, you know, somewhat of a normal status might be your benchmark. But I don't know. We keep talking about this. It's going on for a pretty long time here. But I see more hands. I see Rick and Valerie.
Basically, Valerie stepped out, I'll step in. I like Valerie's last comments. I think I would be in favor of going back to mask, meeting on Monday, distancing. Again, taking input. I'm sorry, I still respect the medical community, but I feel we as a council are adults and we can make our own decisions based on that information. My concern is that the bar may be so high in the medical community that I'm not comfortable with the bar that high. As long as the metric is going down, as long as and not only going down, but the numbers are starting to be within a reasonable range, and I realize that can be individually chosen, I would still be in favor, as I said, meeting Monday, socially distancing, having masks, and then also respecting by getting input from the medical community for the future. Thank you.
Okay, well, 4 out of 7 of you have now indicated a preference for going back to social distancing on Monday. Rob, do you have something else to add on that, or can we move on?
I'd just like to say that I really appreciate Rick's comments, and I know that I've joked with Mark in the past that if you've ever tried to run a business and you ever asked your lawyer for advice, typically it's lawyer's job to absolutely keep you out of trouble, and they would prefer that you be bubble wrapped on a carpeted living room floor eating soft oatmeal so that you couldn't possibly get hurt under any circumstance. And I think that when Rick says that the medical community may have a standard that's so, they may have a thought that's so high, or a bar that's so high that to potentially to keep people out of trouble at all times, that's their opinion. But as Joel said, we are kind of, we'll say, paid to be leaders, and I think that we should have the open meetings while simultaneously consulting with the potential for the hospital to give us their opinion in the future. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Rick, is your hand, I think, maybe just still up from before?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, we got it. Kurt? Oh, you're muted. You're on mute.
I was just going to say that in response that the best leaders get the best information available. So you need to consult people who know more than you do and have the visibility.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to agenda review. I guess it sounds like the plan is at this point, I'll just recap that discussion before we move on, that it sounds like we are going back to meeting in person next Monday, and that we will also get an update from the medical community about the status of where things are at and what might be a safe decision. Agenda review. Okay, so we have a workshop next Monday. First of all, I guess we were scheduled initially to have an executive session today on labor, but that got bumped to next week. So we won't be doing that today. So next week we have a discussion on the Long Ridge, Washington Conservation District. That's a motion from the Historic Buildings and Sites Commission. We have LB projects, that's the land and building projects. We have a discussion on the business retention and relocation and system development charge grant programs. And then the executive session dealing with property and labor. October 4th. Oh, okay, we have a fifth Monday, I guess, this month. That's I lost track there of. We don't have a regular Wednesday meeting apparently for a little bit. We have 2 workshops first before we have a Wednesday meeting. So the October 4th, we have a workshop that will deal with the buildable lands inventory and the urban growth boundary, urban campground discussion, and an executive session scheduled for labor. And then October 6th, we have a Wednesday business meeting that right now is scheduled to have a public hearing on an ordinance that would designate the Riverside Park as a local historical landmark, as well as Caveman Bridge. We would also be having a public hearing to consider construction excise tax. And then council action, we have a resolution on a street sweeping contract extension, a resolution on the Hidden Valley Development System Development Charge Grant extension, and a resolution that would award wastewater master service, awarding the wastewater master services agreement. Council action on a resolution that would allocate $3 million of the American Rescue Plan Act funds to the Water Capital Fund. And then on the consent calendar, a resolution to award City Hall a canopy re-roofing project, and a resolution to do a contract on renewing the Josephine County Community Corrections. Any questions on any of that? Not seeing hands shoot up. All right, is there anything else that anybody would like to have added to the agenda?
Sir, I did have a question, but I couldn't get that hand thing hit fast enough.
Go ahead.
I just have a question on the resolution for the Hidden Valley Development System development. Is that a company, Hidden Valley Development System? I'm just kind of curious because it sounds like high school, so I'm associating it.
The system goes with the SDC, but yeah, if I don't know if Brad or Aaron can answer Hidden Valley Development.
This is one of our economic development grants where they have asked for that. I apologize, I don't have that application right here in front of me, but it's one of the typical business meeting where you have the hearing to or to review an extension. Well, in this case, it's an extension. They've already received the grant approval and they're asking for an extension on it.
Okay, I thought that was the case, but I couldn't remember anything, and I guess it was Hidden Valley just made me think that it was out in the county. So it is something that has been approved, and it is in the city. Those are the 2 criteria that I just wanted to double check on.
Yes.
All right, does anybody else have questions or anything you want to add for today? Brian.
Yeah, I have a question about the Downtown Welcome Center. I know that we've had a meeting about that, and I have the sense that we were going to at some point be having another meeting about that, and I just, maybe I'm missing it on here, or maybe I just don't remember where we left that, but I was just maybe trying to see where that was at.
Yeah.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Great question. We're waiting for a response from the chamber. I inquired on their desire to staff the Welcome Center, the Downtown Welcome Center on 6 and G, and provided them with scope of services. And they then had a couple of extra questions of me. I provided them some additional information so they can put together a general estimate on what that would potentially cost the city. Once they have that provided to us, we'll be scheduling another meeting to have a discussion on the Welcome Center, unless council would like to have a discussion on the Welcome Center without that information and providing additional whatever topics.
Thank
Dave?
you. I think there might be two topics there because there's the staffing of the facility and then there's the facility itself. So are those two separate discussions?
So Mayor, would you like me to answer part of that question?
Sure.
So Councilor DeLagrange, we are still working with architects. We're going to come up with a couple of sketches, as we talked about, for some options of what can be done with the bathroom. We really want to establish, though, per your guys' direction, who is going to be in that facility and what services they're going to be providing in that facility before we begin a remodel, because as you all pointed out, we don't want to remodel the outside till we know what the inside is going to do. Maybe we have to chop it in half and add exterior doors or something along those lines. So that's where we're at. We were going to come back to you with a couple of potentials for the exterior facing restrooms, and then continue on as we decide what we're doing with manning that facility moving forward.
Great, thanks.
So we received a reply back from the chamber this morning, and they're just requesting a meeting to discuss further what our needs are. So it's going to be at least a couple more weeks before we really know what, whether they're interested. Anything else for today? Valerie.
Yeah, then one thing I wanted to clarify, that there was another letter sent out this morning from the chamber, but you just acknowledged that they had a few other questions and they wanted to root those out with a couple counselors or somebody and Aaron. So another thing I had a question about, and I was really happy to see that the survey went out today for the American Rescue Plan. I did notice that it is out and available. So I kind of wanted an update on the survey dates, because I had a couple people who were on the task force for the county tell me in this last week that they're kind of sitting waiting to hear what the city has said about giving forth the money for the businesses, because they're kind of they don't know where to proceed. So I know that they were very anxious for us to get some input to them as to whether we were going to provide any money for the businesses. And I said that I knew that we had a survey out and I thought we were going to get the information back. So I just would like to have, when that survey's back, what kind of answer we can give to them so that we know, so they know that we're working on it, but we're getting information from our constituents. So do we have that? I think Adam has his hand up.
Adam might, if Adam's online, he might have the specific date, but the plan is for that to come back to council with the data for you to take a look at mid-November. So that would mean council would probably need some time to digest that. And I don't know what that would look like, but the goal was for us, since we have it out now in September, that you'd be getting results back in November.
Okay, then I'm going to just say to you, Aaron, since I know that you're on that committee, that you may convey that to them, because it didn't sound like they had that information, and so they were coming to me. So that would be great if you could get that out to them so that they knew that. So thank you.
Mayor.
Go ahead,
yes,
Adam.
The survey will close on October 15th.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you for that. And I do actually have one more thing that I just want to announce more than anything else, and this will eventually get on the agenda, but the DMO has indeed made an offer to a person out of Salem for the executive director. And so they were putting together the final contracting and putting it out to that person. And that person in October, I think October 20th, they were going to try to come down and introduce themselves to the council. So that was one of the things on their docket, but that was exciting to see them move forward with that. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Good progress. Rob.
Yeah, Valerie, thank you for that. That's exciting. And I really appreciate the fact that even though the DMO does not have to introduce that person to us, because they're an independent organization, I think it's really smart for that person to get a feel of who the council is and a feel of Grants Pass. And I think that's a great step forward. So I'm happy to hear that. On the subject of surveys, I was just wondering, because I know we were putting, and I'm not exactly sure who was putting together, but I know it was supposed to come back to council before it went out to the public, the survey of, I believe it was Parklets and/or the G Street, the potential G Street project. And I'm just asking, I guess, Aaron or maybe Brad, how that, the formation of those surveys is coming.
Yeah, Brad just gave me a draft to take a look at, and I'm in the process of reviewing that, and so we're almost ready to get that out, and we can provide it to council in advance if you so desire.
Well, my understanding is that we were very clear with our direction that, yes, we wanted to see it before it went out to potentially tweak it, improve it, give it our blessing or whatever. So I believe that was very clear the last time we gave direction. So I would definitely like to see it before it is sent out.
Definitely.
Thanks, Aaron. Brian.
Yeah, what Valerie said reminded me that I heard, I don't want to say it's a rumor, but I heard that the new housing and neighborhood specialist may have been hired and started today. So is that, I just wanted to see if that was true.
That is not a rumor. That is very much true. Yes, her name is Amber Neek, and I think some of you may know her as a prior applicant to the open city council seat that you had last year. But yes, today is her first day. We got her toured around City Hall, and she's in the process of digesting a ton of information. So we will be sure to get her introduced to you very, very soon.
Fantastic.
All right, thanks, Brad. All right, anything else to add to the agenda? I think it's probably time for somebody to make a motion to adjourn. I'm looking at you, Kurt.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Valerie with the second, thank you.
Make sure I'm awake in here or what?
It's just you two are actually the only ones who have your camera on, which I have to say I very much appreciate because it gives me something to look at other than myself. So motion is to adjourn.
I'll take that as a compliment.
All in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. We will see you in person on Monday. Thank you. Have a good week.